The Nicomachean Ethics, by Aristotle. Translated by Thomas Taylor. Book I. Chapter I. Every art and every method, and in like manner every action and deliberate choice, appear to aspire after a certain good. Hence it is well said, that the good is that which all things desire. Of ends, however, there appears to be a certain difference ; for some of them are energies, but others of them besides these are certain works. But in those things in which there are certain ends besides the actions, in these the works are naturally adapted to be better than the energies. Since, however, there are many actions and arts, and sciences, there will also be many ends. For the end of medicine is health, of the shipbuilding art a ship, of the military art victory, and of the economic art wealth. But such arts as are of this kind are arranged under one certain power, just as the bridle making art is arranged under the equestrian art, and such other arts as pertain to equestrian instruments. Both this art, however, and every warlike action, are arranged under the military art, and after the same manner other arts are arranged under other powers. But in all these, the ends of those arts which are architectonic, or master arts, are more eligible than all the ends of the arts which are subordinate to the master arts. For the latter are pursued for the sake of the former. It makes, however, no difference whether the energies themselves are the ends of actions, or something else besides these, in the same manner as in the above mentioned sciences. Chapter II. If therefore there is a certain end of actions which we wish to obtain for its own sake, but we desire other things on account of this, and our choice is not directed to all things for the sake of something else, (for thus there would be a progression to infinity, so that appetite would be empty and vain), if this be the case, it is evident that this end will be the good, and that which is the most excellent. Will not, therefore, the knowledge of this end be of great importance with respect to life? For by having, like archers, a mark at which we may aim, we shall obtain what is fit in a greater degree. If this, however, be the case, we must endeavour to adumbrate what it is, and show to what science or power it belongs. But it would seem that it belongs to that power which is the most principal, and is especially architectonic. And the political power, or science, appears to be a thing of this kind. For this ordains what sciences ought to be instituted in cities, and which of them ought to be learnt by the several individuals, and to what extent. We likewise see that the most honourable of the powers or faculties are arranged under this power, as, for instance, the military, the economical, and the rhetorical powers. Since, however, the remaining practical sciences use this political science, and since it also legally establishes what ought to be done, and from what it is required to abstain, the end of this science will comprehend in itself the ends of the other sciences, so that this will be human good itself. For though the good of an individual and a city is the same, yet to obtain and preserve the good of a city appears to be something greater and more perfect. For we must be satisfied, indeed, if we can effect the good of an individual alone. But it is more beautiful and divine to effect the good of a nation and cities. These are the things, therefore, which the method being political requires. Chapter III. It will, however, be discussed sufficiently, if it is rendered perspicuous according to its subject matter. For accuracy must not be similarly investigated in all discussions, as neither in all the works of art. Things beautiful, however, and just, with which the political science is conversant, possess so great a difference, and are involved in so much ambiguity, that, to some persons, their subsistence appears to be from law only, and not from nature. What is good, likewise, possesses a certain ambiguity of this kind, because it happens that many persons are injured by it. For some have perished through wealth, but others through fortitude. We must be satisfied, therefore, in speaking about and from such things, if we can indicate the truth by a rude adumbration, and if our conclusions in discussing things which have a frequency of subsistence are similar in accuracy to the things themselves. After the same manner, likewise, it is requisite to admit every thing that has been said. For it is the province of an erudite man so far to investigate the accurate in each genus of things, as the nature of the thing will admit; since it appears to be a similar thing to assent to a mathematician when speaking probably, and to require demonstrations from a rhetorician. Every one, however, judges well of those things which he knows, and of these is a good judge. Hence, the man who is learned in any thing, judges well of that thing. But he in short forms a proper judgment about every thing, who is learned in every thing. Hence, a youth is not a proper auditor of the political science, for he is unskilled in the actions pertaining to life. But reasonings are from and about these. And besides this, if he yields to his passions, he will in vain, and without any advantage, be an auditor of ethical doctrines. Since the end here is not knowledge, but action. It makes, however, no difference whether a person is a youth as to his age, or has juvenile manners. For the defect is not from time, but from living, and engaging in every pursuit from passion, since the knowledge of such persons, in the same manner as that of intemperate, is useless. But a knowledge of these things will be very advantageous to those whose appetites and actions are conformable to reason. And thus much, by way of preface concerning the auditor of ethics, how he ought to admit discussions of this kind, and what we propose to consider in this treatise. CHAPTER 4. Repeating, therefore, what we have said, since all knowledge and deliberate choice aspires after a certain good, let us show what that is, which we say the political science desires, and what the supreme good is of all actions. By name, therefore, it is nearly acknowledged by most men, for both the vulgar and the learned call it felicity. But they conceive that to live well and to act well are the same thing, as to be happy. Concerning felicity, however, what it is, they are dubious, and the multitude do not form the same opinion of it as the wise. For some of them indeed conceive it to rank among the number of things which are clear and evident, such as pleasure, or wealth, or honour, but others assert it to be something else. Frequently, likewise, the same person forms a different opinion of it. For when diseased he conceives it to be health, but when poor, riches. And those who are conscious of their ignorance admire those who assert something grand, and above their comprehension. Some too, besides these many goods, are of opinion that there is another good subsisting by itself, which is the cause to all these of their being good. To examine, therefore, all the opinions would perhaps be a vain undertaking, but it will be sufficient to consider those that are most eminent, or which appear to be in some respect reasonable. We must not, however, be ignorant that arguments from principles and to principles differ from each other. For Plato well doubts about and investigates this, whether the way is from principles or to principles, as in a race from the president of the games to the goal, or the contrary. For we must begin from things that are known, but these subsist in a twofold respect. For some things are known to us, but others are simply known. Perhaps, therefore, we should begin from things known to us. Hence, it is necessary that the auditor of discussions about things beautiful and just, and in short about political concerns, if he is to be benefited, should be adorned with worthy manners. For the principle is this, that the thing is so, viz. That certain actions are worthy and others are unworthy. And if this is sufficiently apparent, it is not at all requisite to know why it is so. But such a one either possesses or will easily acquire ethical principles. Let him, however, who has neither of these, hear what Hesiod says. He the first rank of excellence maintains, who from himself in every thing is wise, and what even to the end is best foresees. He too is good who yields to wise advice. But he who neither from himself is wise, nor to assent to others can endure, is but a useless despicable man. CHAPTER 5. Let us, however, return from whence we have digressed. For it seems that men do not unreasonably form an opinion of good and felicity from the different kinds of lives. The vulgar, indeed, and the most worthless part of mankind, place felicity in pleasure, and on this account they embrace the life which consists in the enjoyment of pleasure. For there are three kinds of lives which especially take the lead. The one we have just mentioned, the political life, and the third is the contemplative life. The multitude, therefore, appear to be perfectly servile, deliberately choosing the life of cattle. And they support their opinion by the example of many persons in power, who have preferred a voluptuous life, and have lived like Sardanapalus. But men of elegant minds, and those who are addicted to practical concerns, place felicity in honour. For this is nearly the end of the political life. This, however, appears to be more superficial than the good which is the object of our investigation. For honour seems to be rather in the persons that honour than in him who is honoured. But we prophesy that good is something appropriate, and of which it is difficult to deprive its possessor. Farther still, it seems that men pursue honour in order that they may believe themselves to be worthy persons. They seek, therefore, to be honoured by wise men, and by those to whom they are known, and with a view to virtue. It is evident, therefore, that according to these men, virtue is more excellent than honour. Perhaps, however, some one may apprehend that this virtue is rather the end of the political life. But even this appears to be more imperfect than the chief good ought to be. For it appears to be possible that he who possesses virtue may sleep, or be unemployed through the whole of his life, and besides this may be afflicted with evils, and experience the greatest misfortunes. But no one would proclaim a man thus living to be happy, unless for the purpose of defending his position. And concerning these things indeed enough, for we have spoken sufficiently about them in our miscellaneous writings. But the third life is the contemplative, which we shall make the object of our consideration hereafter. The life, however, which is engaged in the acquisition of riches is a certain violent life, and it is evident that wealth is not the good which we investigate. For wealth is useful, and for the sake of something else. Hence, the things which have been before mentioned may be considered as ends rather than wealth, for they are loved on their own account. It appears, however, that neither does felicity consist in these, though many arguments are adduced to prove that it does. These things, therefore, we shall dismiss. CHAPTER 6. Perhaps, however, it is better to consider universal good, and inquire how it is said to subsist, though such an inquiry as this will be arduous, because the men who have introduced ideas are our friends. But it may perhaps seem to be better, and indeed necessary to the salvation of truth, to subvert the opinions even of our friends. For both being our friends, i.e. Plato and truth, it is wholly to give the preference to truth. Those, however, who have introduced this opinion, do not make ideas of things in which they admit there are the prior and the posterior. Hence, neither do they establish an idea of numbers. But good is predicated of essence, of quality, and of relation. That, however, which has a subsistence per se, and essence, are naturally prior to that which subsists as a relative. For this, i.e. a relative, resembles the branch of a tree, and an accident of being, so that there will not be a common idea in these. Again, good is predicated in as many ways as being, for it is predicated in essence, as God and intellect, which are essences and are said to be good, and in quality, as the virtues, in quantity as the moderate, in relation as utility, in time as occasion, and in place as a habitation. and after the same manner in the other predicaments. It is evident, therefore, that there will not be a certain common, universal, and one good ; for it would not be predicated in all the categories, but in one alone. Farther still, since of all things which subsist according to one idea there is also one science, of all goods there would be one certain science. But now there are many sciences of things which are under one category. Thus, for instance, with occasion the art of commanding an army is conversant in war, but the medical art in disease ; and with the moderate indeed, the medical art is conversant in food, but the gymnastic art in labour. It may, however, be doubted what their intention is in denominating every idea itself, since in man itself, and in man, there is one and the same definition of man. For so far as man, there is no difference between them. But if this be the case, neither so far as good will be good itself, and goods differ, nor will it be in a greater degree good from being eternal, since neither is that which is white for a long time more white than that which is white only for one day. The Pythagoreans, however, appear to speak more probably concerning the good ; for they place the one in the co«ordination of things good, whom Speusippus also seems to have followed. But the discussion of these things pertains to another treatise. A certain doubt, however, presents itself concerning the particulars we have just mentioned, because reasons are not assigned concerning every good, but things which are of themselves the objects of pursuit and love are predicated according to one species, and those things which are effective of these or in a certain respect preserve them, or impede their contraries, are predicated on account of these, and after another manner. It is evident, therefore, that goods may be predicated in two ways, and that some things indeed are good per se, but others are good on account of these. Separating, therefore, goods per se from things useful, let us consider whether they are predicated according to one idea. But what kind of goods can be said to be good per se? Are they such as are pursued alone, apart from other things, such as to be wise, to see, and some pleasures and honours? For these, though we pursue them on account of something else, yet at the same time may be ranked by some one among goods which are good per se. Or is the good per se nothing else except idea? Form, therefore, or idea will be vain. But if these also rank among goods which are good per se, it will be requisite that the same definition of the good should be conspicuous in all of them, just as there is the same definition of whiteness in snow and cerus. But of honour, and prudence, and pleasure, there will be other and different definitions, so far as they are goods. The good, therefore, is not something common according to one idea. In what manner, however, is it said that there is one idea of the good? For it does not resemble things which are fortuitously homonymous. Is it because all goods are from one and are referred to one good? Or is it rather according to analogy? For as sight is in the body, so is intellect in the soul, and another thing in another. Perhaps, however, these things must be omitted at present, for the accurate discussion of them will be better adapted to another philosophy. And in a similar manner concerning idea. For even if there is some one good which is predicated in common, or which is something itself separate by itself, it is evident that it can neither be practicable nor acquired by man. But now that which is practicable by man, and which he may obtain, is the object of investigation. Perhaps, however, the knowledge of this separate good may to some one appear to be better with respect to those goods which may be acquired, and which are practicable. For having this as an exemplar, we may in a greater degree know those things which are good for us, and by knowing may more easily obtain them. This assertion, therefore, has indeed a certain probability, but it seems to be dissonant to the sciences. For all the sciences aspire after a certain good, and investigate that which is wanting, omitting the knowledge of it, though it is not reasonable to suppose that all artists are ignorant of, and do not search for an aid of such great importance. It is likewise dubious what advantage a weaver or a carpenter would derive to their arts from the knowledge of the good itself, or how he who surveys the idea of the good will become more skilled in medicine, or in commanding an army. For it appears that the physician does not in this way consider health, but that he considers the health of man, and perhaps rather the health of this particular man. For he restores to health an individual, and thus much concerning these things. CHAPTER 7. Now, however, let us return to the investigated good, and show what it is. For it appears that there is a different good in a different action and art, since there is one good in the medical art, another in the art of commanding an army, and in a similar manner in the remaining arts. What therefore is the good of each? Is it not that for the sake of which other things are affected by that art? But this in the medical art indeed is health, in the art of commanding an army is victory, in the art of building a house is a house, and something else in another art. And in every action and deliberate choice it is the end, since all of them perform other things for the sake of this. Hence, if there is one certain end of all actions, this will be the practical good. But if there are many ends, these will be practical goods. The reasoning, however, in its transition arrives at the same thing, as was asserted by us in the beginning. But we must endeavour to render this still more clear. Because, therefore, it appears that there are many ends, and of these we choose some on account of others, such as wealth, flutes, and in short instruments, it is evident that all ends are not perfect. That however which is most excellent appears to be something perfect. So that if there is only one certain perfect end, this will be what we investigate, but if there are many, it will be the most perfect of these. We denominate, however, that which is pursuable for its own sake, more perfect than that which is pursuable for the sake of something else, and that which is never eligible on account of another thing, than things which are eligible both on their own account and for the sake of something else. In short, the completely perfect is that which is always eligible on its own account, and never on account of something else. Felicity, however, especially appears to be a thing of this kind, for we always choose this on its own account, and never on account of anything else. But we choose honour, and pleasure, intellect, and every virtue on their own account. Indeed, (for though we should derive no farther advantage than what the possession of them affords, yet each of them would be the object of our choice), yet we also choose them for the sake of felicity. No one, however, chooses felicity for the sake of these, nor, in short, for the sake of anything else. The same thing also appears to happen from that which enables a man to be sufficient to himself. For perfect good appears to be self-sufficient. But we call the self-sufficient that which is not only sufficient to him who lives a solitary life, but which is also sufficient to parents and children, to a wife, and in short, to friends and fellow citizens, since man is naturally a political animal. A certain boundary, however, must be assumed of these things. For if good is to be extended to parents and their offspring, and to the friends of friends, there will be a procession to infinity. But this, indeed, we shall consider hereafter. We call, however, the self-sufficient that which, subsisting by itself, alone makes life eligible, and in want of nothing. But we think that felicity is a thing of this kind, and besides this, we think that it is the most eligible of all things, and is not conumerated with any other good. For if it were conumerated with even the smallest good, it is evident that it would be more eligible, since that which is added would become an excess of good. But a greater good is always more eligible. Felicity, therefore, appears to be something perfect, and sufficient to itself. being the end of actions. Perhaps, however, to say that felicity is the best of things is to assert that which is acknowledged by all men. But it is requisite that we should yet more clearly say what it is. Perhaps, therefore, this will be effected, if the work of man is assumed. For as to the player on the flute, to the statuary, and to every artist, and in short, to those who have a certain work and action, the good and the excellent appear to be in the work. This also may appear to be the case with man, if he has a certain work. Whether, therefore, are there certain works and actions indeed of a carpenter and a shoemaker, but of man is there no work, and is he naturally indolent? Or shall we say that as of the eye, the hand, and the foot, and in short of each of the parts of the body, there appears to be a certain work, so likewise of man shall we admit that besides all these there is a certain work? What then will this work be? For to live appears to be common also to plants, as well as to men. But the peculiar work of man is now investigated. The nutritive and augmentative life therefore must be rejected. And a certain sensitive life will be consequent to this. It appears, however, that this also is common to a horse, and an ox, and to every animal. A certain practic life, therefore, accompanied with reason remains. But of this, one kind is obedient to reason, but the other possesses reason, and energizes discursively. Since this life, however, is predicated in a twofold respect, i.e. according to energy and according to habit, it must be admitted to subsist according to energy. For this appears to be predicated according to a more principal mode of subsistence. But if the work of man is the energy of soul, according to reason, or not without reason, and we say that the same thing is the work of the human species, and of a worthy man, just as the same thing is the work of a harper, and of a good harper, and in short, this is the case in all things, excellence according to virtue being added to the work. For the work of a harper is to play on the harp, and of a good harper to play well on it. If this be the case, and we admit the work of man to be a certain life, and this to be the energy of the soul, and actions in conjunction with reason, but by a worthy man, these things are well and beautifully performed, and every thing is well accomplished according to its proper virtue. If this be the case, human good will be the energy of soul according to virtue. But if there are many virtues, it will be the energy of soul according to the best and most perfect virtue, and besides this, in a perfect life. For as one swallow does not make spring, nor one day, so neither does one day, nor a little time, make a man blessed and happy. Let this, therefore, be a description of the good. For it is necessary, perhaps, as in a picture, first to delineate and afterwards add the colours. But it would seem that any one may be able to adduce and distinctly arrange things which are well delineated, and that time is the inventor of, or a good co-operator with, things of this kind. Whence, also, accessions are made to the arts, for any one may add to what is wanting. It is also requisite to call to mind what has been before said, and not to search for accuracy similarly in all things, but investigate it in each according to the subject matter, and so far as is appropriate to the method, pertaining to the inquiry. For a carpenter and a geometrician investigate a right angle differently. The former, indeed, so far as is useful to his work, but the latter explores what it is, or what the quality is which it possesses, for he is a contemplator of truth. After the same manner, therefore, we must proceed in other things, lest what is superfluous should become more abundant than the works themselves. Neither must the cause be required similarly in all things, but in some, as, for instance, concerning principles, it is sufficient to have shown properly that they are. But the subsistence of a thing is the first thing and the principle. Of principles, however, some are surveyed by induction, others by sense, others from a certain custom, and others in a different way. but we should endeavour to discuss every thing so far as its nature permits, and should earnestly apply ourselves to define well, for this is of great importance with respect to what is consequent. The principle, therefore, appears to be more than half of the whole, and many of the things which are objects of inquiry become manifest through it. CHAPTER 8. Felicity, therefore, must be considered by us, not only from the conclusion and the particulars from which its definition consists, but also from the assertions of others concerning it. For every thing which is inherent in a thing accords with the truth, but what is true is rapidly dissonant with what is false. Since goods therefore have a twofold distribution, and some of them are said to be external, but others pertain to the soul and the body, we call those pertaining to the soul the most proper and principal goods, but we place the physical actions and energies about the soul. Hence it is well said, according to this opinion, which is ancient, and assented to by those who philosophize, that felicity is the energy of the soul according to virtue. It is also rightly said, that certain actions and energies constitute the end, i.e. felicity. For thus felicity will consist in the goods pertaining to the soul, and not in external goods. With this reasoning, likewise, the assertions accord that the happy man lives well, and acts well, for nearly felicity will be a certain living well, and acting well. It appears, moreover, that every thing which is sought for in felicity is inherent in the definition we have given it. For to some, indeed, felicity appears to be virtue, to others prudence, and to others a certain wisdom, but to others it appears to be these things, or some one of them, accompanied with pleasure, or not without pleasure. Others also comprehend in the definition of felicity external affluence. But of these opinions, some are supported by the authority of many and ancient men, and others by a few and renowned men. It is not, however, reasonable to suppose that either of these have wholly erred, but that they have erred in some one particular, and are right in most things. With those, therefore, who say that felicity is every virtue, or a certain virtue, our assertion accords, for it is the energy of the soul according to virtue. Perhaps, however, it differs in no small degree to conceive that what is most excellent consists in possession, or to conceive that it consists in use, and that it consists in habit, or in energy. For it is possible that habit, when inherent, may be effective of no good, as in him who is asleep, or who in some other way is inactive. But this cannot be the case with energy. For he who possesses virtue and energy necessarily acts, and acts well. But, as in the Olympic games, not the most beautiful and the strongest are crowned, but those who contend, for some of these are victorious. So those who act rightly obtain those things in life which are beautiful and good. The life also of these is in itself delectable, independent of external pleasure. For to be delighted is among the number of things pertaining to the soul. But to every one that is delightful of which he is said to be a lover, as a horse to a lover of horses, and a spectacle to a lover of spectacles. After the same manner, also, just things are delightful to a lover of justice, and in short what pertains to virtue to a lover of virtue. Things, therefore, delectable to the multitude are hostile to each other, because they are not naturally delightful. But to the lovers of what is beautiful in conduct, those things are delectable which are delectable by nature, and such are the actions according to virtue, so that they are delectable to these, and are so per se. The life also of these is not at all in want of pleasure, as a certain appendage, but contains pleasure in itself. For in addition to what has been said, he is not a good man who does not rejoice in beautiful actions. For neither would any one call him just, who does not rejoice in acting justly, nor him liberal, who does not rejoice in liberal actions, and in a similar manner in the other virtues. If this, however, be the case, actions according to virtue will be of themselves delectable, but they are also good and beautiful, and especially each of these if the worthy man judges well concerning them, but he judges in the way we have said. Felicity, therefore, is a thing most excellent, most beautiful, and most delectable. Nor are these to be separated from each other according to the Delian inscription, That which is most just is most beautiful, but to be well is the best of things, and for a man to obtain the object of his love is the most delectable of things." For all these are inherent in the best energies. But we say that felicity is all these, or one of them, and that the most excellent. At the same time, however, it appears, as we have said, that external goods are requisite to felicity. For it is impossible, or not easy to perform beautiful actions without the assistance of externals ; since many things are indeed performed as it were through instruments, by means of friends, and wealth, and political power. The privation also of some things, such as nobility, a good offspring, and beauty, defile a blessed condition of being. For he cannot be entirely happy who is very deformed in his body, or of ignoble birth, or who leads a solitary life, and is deprived of children. And perhaps he can in a still less degree be entirely happy, if his children are very vicious, or being good, die. As we have said, therefore, a completely happy life requires such a prosperity as this, whence also some arrange prosperity, but others virtue, in the same place with felicity. CHAPTER 9. Hence also it is doubted whether felicity is a thing which may be acquired by discipline, or custom, or in some other way by exercise, or whether it accedes by a certain divine allotment, or from fortune. If, therefore, any other thing is the gift of the gods to men, it is reasonable to suppose that felicity also is the gift of divinity, and especially because it is the best of human concerns. This, however, will perhaps be more adapted to another discussion. But it appears that though it should not be sent by divinity to men, but is procured through virtue, and a certain discipline, or exercise, it belongs to the most divine of things. For the reward and end of virtue appears to be most excellent, and something divine and blessed. Felicity also will be a thing very common, for it is able to be present, through a certain discipline and attention to all men who are not mutilated with respect to virtue. But if it is better that felicity should be acquired after this manner, rather than from fortune, it is reasonable that it should be so acquired, since natural productions subsist in such a way as it is most beautiful for them to subsist. And in a similar manner, things which are produced by art, or by any other cause, and especially such as are produced by the most excellent cause. To commit, however, the greatest and most beautiful of things to fortune, would be very lawless and reprehensible. The object of investigation, likewise, is apparent from the definition of felicity. For we have said that it is a certain energy of the soul according to virtue. But of the remaining goods, some indeed are present from necessity, but others co-operate and are naturally adapted to be useful organically. These things also will accord with what we have said in the beginning. For we established the end of the political science as the best end. But this pays the greatest attention to the citizens, in order to render them characters of a certain description, and that they may be good men and practisers of beautiful actions. Reasonably, therefore, do we neither call an ox, nor a horse, nor any other irrational animal happy. For it is not possible that any one of them can partake of such energy as this. Through this cause, likewise, neither is a child happy, for he is not yet, on account of his age, a practiser of things of this kind. But those children who are said to be happy are proclaimed to be blessed, through hope, that when they become men they will obtain the rational energy in perfection. For felicity, as we have said, requires perfect virtue, and a perfect life. For many mutations and all various fortunes happen in life. And it is possible that he whose affairs are in the most prosperous condition may in old age fall into the greatest calamities, as in heroic poems it is fabled concerning Priam. But no one would call him happy who experiences such misfortunes, and who dies miserably. Chapter 10. Shall we say, therefore, that no other man is to be proclaimed happy as long as he lives, but that according to Solon it is requisite to look at the end of life? If, however, we admit this, is a man, therefore, then happy when he dies? Or is this perfectly absurd? Especially to those who say, as we do, that felicity is a certain energy. But if neither we call him who is dead happy, nor was this the intention of Solon, but his meaning is, that a man may be securely proclaimed blessed, as being now out of the reach of evils and misfortunes, even this also is attended with a certain doubt. For there appears to be a certain good and evil to him who is dead, if there is also to him who is alive, but without sensation, such as honour and ignominy, and in short, the prosperity and adversity of his descendants. This, however, also presents us with a difficulty. For it is possible that to the offspring of him who has lived to old age blessedly, and has died rationally, many mutations may happen, and that some of them may be good, and may obtain a life according to their desert, but that the contrary may take place with others. It is likewise evident that there may be an all various apostasy in them from the manners of their parents. It would, therefore, be absurd if he who is dead should also be changed together with them, and should at one time become happy, and again miserable. It is likewise absurd that the affairs of descendants should not for a certain time be of any consequence whatever to parents. Let us, however, return to the former subject of doubt, for perhaps that which is now investigated may be surveyed from it. If, therefore, it is necessary to look to the end of life, and then to proclaim each man blessed, not as being now blessed, but because he was so before, is it not absurd when he is happy, i.e. while he is living, that what is present with him, i.e. felicity, should not be asserted of him with truth, because we are unwilling to proclaim the living happy on account of the mutations of life, and because we apprehend felicity to be something stable, and by no means easily to be changed? But fortunes frequently circulate about the same persons. For it is evident, if we should follow fortune, we must frequently call the same man happy, and again miserable, thus evincing the happy man to be like the chameleon, and possessing an infirm stability. Or shall we say that it is indeed by no means right to follow fortune? For living well or ill is not among the gifts of fortune, but human life, as we have said, requires the goods of fortune. The energies, however, according to virtue, are the mistresses of felicity, but the contrary energies are the mistresses of the contrary. That also which is now the subject of doubt bears testimony to our assertion. For in no human affair is there so much stability as in the energies according to virtue, since they appear to be more stable than even the sciences themselves. And of these very energies, those that are most honourable are also most stable, because blessed men principally and most assiduously live in these. For this appears to be the cause that oblivion does not happen concerning them. The object of investigation, therefore, is present with the happy man, and he will be such through life. For always, or the most of all men, he will perform and contemplate things pertaining to virtue, will bear the changes of fortune most beautifully, and in the most perfectly elegant manner, as being truly good, and a square without blame. Since, however, many things happen from fortune, and which differ in magnitude and parvitude, it is evident that prosperous and in a similar manner adverse circumstances, when they are small, are of no consequence to the life of man, but that such as are great and numerous, if they are indeed prosperous, render life more blessed. For they are also naturally adapted to adorn life, and the use of them is beautiful and good. And that, on the contrary, if they are adverse, they oppress and injure beatitude, for they bring with them molestation, and are an impediment to many energies. At the same time, however, even in these, the beauty of good conduct shines forth, when a man bears many and great misfortunes easily, not through an insensibility of pain, but in consequence of being generous and magnanimous. But if energies are the mistresses of life, as we have said, no one who is blessed will become miserable, since he will never do any thing that is odious and base. For we are of opinion that the man who is truly good and wise will bear all fortunes in a becoming manner, and from existing circumstances will always perform the most beautiful deeds. Just as a good general will use the army under his command in the most warlike manner, and a shoemaker from the leather with which he is supplied will make the most beautiful shoes. And the same thing will take place with all other artists. If this, however, be the case, the happy man will never become miserable, nor yet if he should fall into the calamities of Priam, will he be blessed. Nor again is he various and easily changed, for he is not easily moved from felicity, nor by any casual misfortunes, but by such as are great and numerous. And after such calamities as these, he will not again become happy in a short time, but if he does recover his felicity, it will be in a certain long and perfect time, in which he will become a partaker of things of a great and beautiful nature. What then prevents us from calling the man happy who energizes according to perfect virtue, and who is sufficiently supplied with external goods, not for any casual time, but through a perfect life? Or ought we to add, that he must also thus live and die conformably to nature, since the future is unapparent to us, and we admit that felicity is an end, and entirely and in every respect perfect? But if this be the case, we must call those among the living blessed, to whom the particulars we have mentioned are and have been present, but we must denominate them blessed as men. And thus much concerning these things. CHAPTER 11. That the good or bad fortune, however, of descendants, and of all friends, should contribute nothing to the happy man, appears to be a thing very unfriendly, and contrary to the opinions of mankind. But since many things happen, and which possess an all various difference, and some of them pertain to us in a greater, but others in a less degree, to discuss them severally appears to be a long and an infinite undertaking. It will, therefore, perhaps be sufficient to speak of them universally, and to adumbrate what they are. As of the calamitous circumstances, then, which happen to the happy man, some have a certain weight, and are of importance in life. This is likewise the case with respect to all his friends. It makes a difference, however, whether each of the calamities happens to the living or the dead. And the difference is much greater than whether the illegal and dreadful deeds which are the subject of tragedy have been formerly perpetrated, or are perpetrated now. In this way, therefore, the difference may also be collected. Perhaps, however, it ought rather to be doubted concerning the dead, whether they partake of any good or ill. For it appears from these things, that though something should arrive to them, whatever it may be, whether good or the contrary, it is something debile and small, either in its own nature, or to them. But if it should possess a certain power, yet it cannot be so great, or of such a kind, as to make those happy, or not so, or to deprive those of blessedness who are. The prosperity, therefore, and in a similar manner the adversity of friends, appears to contribute something to the dead, yet with respect to them, they are of so little consequence, as neither to make those that are happy unhappy, nor affect anything else of the like kind. CHAPTER 12. These things being discussed, let us consider, with respect to felicity, whether it is among the number of things laudable, or rather of things honourable. For it is evident that it does not consist in power. It seems, therefore, that everything which is laudable is praised because it possesses a certain quality, and is in a certain respect referred to something. For we praise the just and the brave man, and in short the good man, and also virtue, on account of works and actions. We likewise praise the strong man and the racer, because they are naturally adapted to possess certain qualities, and have reference in a certain respect to something good and worthy. But this also is evident from the praises which pertain to the gods, for they appear to be ridiculous when referred to us. This, however, happens as we have said, because praise subsists from relation. But if praise is given to things of this kind, it is evident that no praise can be given to the most excellent things, but something greater and better pertains to them, as also appears to be the case. For we proclaim the gods to be blessed and happy, and we also proclaim the most divine of men to be blessed, and in a similar manner we celebrate what is good. For no one praises felicity in the same way as he does justice, but he proclaims it to be blessed, as something more divine and excellent than justice. Eudoxus, likewise, in his defence of pleasure, appears to have given it the palm of victory in a proper manner. For, in consequence of its not being praised, as being among the number of good things, he considers this an indication that it was more excellent than things that are laudable. But God and the good are things of this kind. For other things also are referred to these. For praise, indeed, is given to virtue, since from this we are enabled to perform beautiful deeds. Encomiums, however, pertain to deeds, and in a similar manner to bodies and souls. The accurate discussion, however, of these things is perhaps more adapted to a treatise on encomiums. But to us it is evident, from what has been said, that felicity is among the number of things honourable and perfect. It seems, likewise, that it is so, because it is a principle. For we all of us do everything else for the sake of this. But we admit that the principle and the cause of what is good is something honourable and divine. Chapter 13. Since, however, felicity is a certain energy of the soul, according to perfect virtue, we must direct our attentions to virtue. For perhaps we shall thus also speculate better concerning felicity. But it seems that he who is skilled in the administration of public affairs, labours especially about this, for he wishes to make the citizens worthy persons, and obedient to the laws. And as an example of these, we have the legislators of the Cretans and the Lacedaemonians, and any others there may have been of this kind. If, however, the speculation itself is of the political science, it is evident that the inquiry will be conformable to our intention from the beginning. But our discussion must be concerning virtue, viz. Human virtue. For we investigate human good, and human felicity, and we call human virtue not the virtue of the body, but of the soul. And we say that felicity is the energy of the soul. If, however, this be the case, it is evident that he who is skilled in the administration of public affairs ought to know whatever pertains to the soul, just as he who intends to cure the eyes ought to have a knowledge of the whole body, and this in a greater degree, by how much more honourable and excellent the political is than the medical science. Of physicians, likewise, the more elegant are busily employed about their knowledge of the body. He, therefore, who is skilled in the administration of public affairs must direct his attention to the soul, but he must direct his attention to it for the sake of these things, and so far as is sufficient to the objects of inquiry. For to consider the soul still more accurately is perhaps more laborious and difficult than the present discussion requires. We have also said some things sufficiently concerning it in our popular writings, and those who must be consulted, such as that one part of the soul is irrational, but another rational, but whether these parts are separated in the same manner as the parts of the body, and everything which is partible, or they are two parts in definition alone, and are naturally inseparable, as in the periphery of a circle, the convex and the concave, is of no consequence in the present discussion. Of the irrational part, however, one part resembles the common and vegetative power, I mean the power which is the cause of nutrition and increase. For such a power as this may be admitted to exist in every thing that is nourished, in embryos, and also in perfect animals, since it is more reasonable that this power should exist in them than any other. The virtue, therefore, of this power appears to be common and not human. For this part seems especially to energize in sleep. But a good man and a bad man can in the smallest degree be distinguished in sleep. Whence it is said, that the happy differ in no respect from the miserable during the half of life. But this happens reasonably, for sleep is an inactivity both of the worthy and the depraved soul, except so far as certain motions gradually arrive at the soul. And on this account the phantasms of worthy are better than those of worthless men. But of these things enough. The nutritive part, therefore, must be omitted, since it is naturally destitute of human virtue. There appears, however, to be another certain irrational nature of the soul, which nevertheless participates in a certain respect of reason. For we praise the reason of the continent, and also of the incontinent man, and that part of the soul which possesses reason, for it rightly excites to the most excellent deeds. There appears, however, to be in them, i.e. both in the continent and incontinent, something else naturally contrary to reason, which wars against and resists reason. For, indeed, as the paralyzed parts of the body, if we wish to move them to the right hand, are on the contrary moved to the left, thus also it is in the soul. For the impulses of the incontinent are in a direction contrary to the dictates of reason. In bodies, however, we see that which is moved contrary to the intention of the will, but in the soul we do not see that which is moved contrary to reason. Though perhaps we ought nevertheless to think that in the soul also there is something opposite to reason which is adverse and proceeds in a direction contrary to it. But it is of no consequence in what manner it is different from reason. This part, however, appears, as we have said, to participate of reason. It is obedient, therefore, to the reason of the continent man, and perhaps it is still more obedient to the reason of the temperate and brave man, for all things are in concord with his reason. It appears, therefore, that the irrational part is twofold. For the vegetable part in no respect participates of reason, but the part which desires, and, in short, the orectic part, participates in a certain respect of reason, so far as they are attentive and obedient to it. In this way, therefore, we say that a man has a regard for, or pays attention to his father and his friends, and not after the same manner as he has a regard for the mathematical sciences, but that the irrational part is in a certain respect obedient to reason, admonition and all reproof and exhortation indicate. If, however, it be requisite to say that this part also possesses reason, that which possesses reason will be twofold, the one indeed properly, and in itself, but the other resembling a child attentive to his father. Virtue, likewise, is distributed according to this difference. For we say that of the virtues, some are dianoetic, or belong to the power which reasons scientifically, but others ethical. And we denominate indeed wisdom, intelligence, and prudence dianoetic virtues, but liberality and temperance ethical virtues. For when we speak concerning the manners of man, we do not say that he is wise or intelligent, but that he is mild or temperate. We likewise praise a wise man according to habit, but we call the laudable habits virtues. End of Book 1. Book 2. Chapter 1. Since, however, virtue is twofold, one kind being dianoetic, but the other ethic, the dianoetic, indeed, for the most part receives both its generation and increase from doctrine, on which account it requires experience and time. But the ethic is produced from custom, from whence also it derives the name, which declines but a little from ethos, custom. From which, likewise, it is evident that no one of the ethical virtues is ingenerated in us by nature. For nothing that has a natural subsistence can by custom be brought to act differently from its natural tendency. Thus a stone, which naturally tends downward, cannot be accustomed to tend upward, though some one should hurl it upward 10,000 times. Nor can fire be accustomed to tend downward. Nor can anything else among the things which have natural tendencies different from these, be accustomed to any other tendency than that which it has from nature. The virtues, therefore, are neither from nature, nor are ingenerated in us preternaturally, but they are produced in us in consequence of our being naturally adapted to receive them, and becoming perfect through habit. Again, with respect to such things as are ingenerated in us by nature, of these we first receive the powers, but afterwards employ the energies of those powers, which is evident in the senses. For it is not from frequently seeing, or frequently hearing, that we receive these senses, but, on the contrary, having these senses, we use them, and we do not have them by using them. With respect to the virtues, however, we receive them by first energizing according to them, in the same manner as in the other arts. For those things which it is necessary to do, in consequence of having learnt how to do them, these by doing we learn how to do. Thus, by building we become builders, and by playing on the harp we become harpers. Thus too, by acting justly we become just, prudent by acting prudently, and brave by acting bravely. But what happens in cities bears testimony to the truth of this. For the legislators, by accustoming the citizens to virtue, render them worthy characters, and this indeed is the intention of every legislator. But such as do not effect this well, err. And in this one polity differs from another, the good from the bad. Farther still, from the same things, and through the same things, every virtue is generated and corrupted. And in a similar manner every art. For from playing on the harp both good and bad harpers are produced, and analogously builders of houses, and all other artists. For from building well they will be good builders, but bad from building ill, since if it were not so, there would be no occasion for a preceptor, but all men would be naturally good or bad artists. The like also takes place in the virtues. For by acting in our compacts with men, we become some of us indeed just, but others unjust. And by acting in things of a dreadful nature, and by being accustomed either to be terrified or to be confident in danger, some of us become brave, but others timid. The reasoning, likewise, is similar with respect to desire and anger. For some men, indeed, become temperate and mild, but others intemperate and irascible. These from being in this way conversant with these things, but those from being conversant with them in that way. And in one word, habits are produced from similar energies. Hence it is necessary to render energies endued with a certain quality, for habits follow from the differences of these. It is of no small consequence, therefore, to be thus or thus accustomed, immediately from our youth, but it is of very great consequence, or rather, it is everything. Chapter 2. Since, therefore, the present treatise is not for the sake of theory, like other discussions, for our attention is not directed to this business, that we may know what virtue is, but that we may become good men, since otherwise no advantage would be derived from it. This being the case, it is necessary to consider with respect to actions how they are to be performed, for, as we have said, they are the mistresses of the qualities which habits possess. To act, therefore, according to right reason is common, and is now assumed to be so. We shall, however, hereafter speak concerning this, and show what right reason is, and how it subsists with reference to the other virtues. But this must be previously granted, that every treatise of practical affairs ought only to be an adumbration, and not an accurate discussion, as also we observed in the beginning, because reasonings are required conformable to the subject matter, and in practical affairs, and things contributing to them, there is nothing stable, as neither is there in things which are salubrious. Such, therefore, being the universal reason, in a still greater degree will the discussion of particulars be deficient in accuracy, for it neither falls under art, nor under any precept. It is, however, necessary that those who are engaged in practical affairs should always direct their attention to an opportune time, in the same manner as in medicine, and in the pilot's art. But, though the present discussion is of this nature, we must endeavour to give it assistance. In the first place, therefore, this must be observed, that things of this kind, viz. Actions which produce in us the habits of the virtues, are naturally adapted to be corrupted by excess and defect, as we see in strength and health, which are the virtues of the body, (for it is necessary to use things apparent as testimonies, in things which are unapparent), since exercises which are excessive, and also those which are deficient, corrupt the strength of the body. In like manner meat and drink, when taken in too great or too small a quantity, corrupt the health. But these, when commensurate, produce increase and preserve it. This, therefore, is also the case in temperance and fortitude, and the other virtues. For he who flies from and is afraid of all things, and endures nothing, becomes timid. And he, who in short is afraid of nothing, but marches up to all things, becomes audacious. In a similar manner, he indeed who gives himself up to the enjoyment of every pleasure, and abstains from none, is intemperate. But he who flies from all pleasures, like rustic men, is an insensate person. For temperance and fortitude are corrupted by excess and defect, but are preserved by mediocrity. Not only, however, generations, increments, and corruptions are produced from and by the same things, but the energies also of the virtues will subsist after the same manner, since this likewise is the case in other things which are more apparent, as for instance in strength. For strength is produced by taking much food, and enduring many labours, and the strong man is especially able to do both these. Thus too it is in the virtues, for by abstaining from pleasures we become temperate, and having become temperate, we are especially able to abstain from them. The like also takes place in fortitude. For by being accustomed to despise things of a terrible nature, and to endure them, we become brave, and having become brave, we are especially able to endure terrible things. CHAPTER 3. It is necessary, however, to consider as an indication of habits, the pleasure or pain which is attendant on actions. For he who abstains from corporeal pleasure, and is delighted in doing so, is a temperate man. But he who is grieved when he abstains from them, is intemperate. And he indeed who endures dreadful things, and is delighted with his endurance, or feels no pain from it, is a brave man. But he who feels pain from the endurance of them, is a timid man. For ethical virtue is conversant with pleasures and pains. For we act basely through the influence of pleasure, but we abstain from beautiful conduct through the influence of pain. Hence it is necessary, as Plato says, to be so educated in a certain respect immediately after our youth, that we may be delighted and pained with things from which it is requisite to feel pleasure or pain. For this is right education. Farther still, if the virtues are conversant with actions and passions, but pleasure and pain are consequent to every passion and action, on this account also virtue will be conversant with pleasures and pains. The punishments likewise, which are inflicted through these, indicate the truth of this, for they are certain remedies, but remedies are naturally adapted to operate through contraries. Again, as we have also before observed, the nature of every habit of the soul is referred to and conversant with those things, by which it is adapted to become better and worse. But habits become depraved through pleasures and pains, by pursuing or avoiding these, either such as ought not to be pursued or avoided, or when it is not proper, or in such a way as is not proper, or in as many other modes as such things are distinguished by reason. Hence, some persons define the virtues to be certain apathies and tranquillities, but they do not define them well, because they speak simply, and do not add in such a way as is proper, and when it is proper, and such other additions as are usually made. It is admitted, therefore, that virtue is a thing of this kind, which is conversant with pleasures and pains, and practices things of the most excellent nature, but vice is the contrary. From what has been said, likewise, we may obtain still greater evidence about these things. For as there are three things which pertain to choice, and also three which pertain to aversion, viz. The beautiful in conduct, the advantageous, and the delightful, and three the contraries to these, the base, the disadvantageous, and the painful, the good man indeed acts rightly in all these, but the bad man erroneously, and especially in what pertains to pleasure. For pleasure is common to all animals, and is consequent to every thing which is the object of choice. For the beautiful and the advantageous appear to be delightful. Again, pleasure is co-nourished with all of us from our infancy, on which account also it is difficult to wipe away this passion, with which our life is imbued. We likewise direct our actions by pleasure and pain, as by a rule, some of us in a greater and others in a less degree. On this account, therefore, it is necessary that the whole of this discussion should be conversant with these things. For to rejoice or be pained properly or improperly is of no small consequence in actions. Farther still, it is more difficult to fight with pleasure than with anger, as Heraclitus says. But both art and virtue are always conversant with that which is more difficult. For that which is well done is better when it is effected with greater difficulty. Hence, on this account also, the whole business, both of ethics and politics, is conversant with pleasures and pains. For he who employs these well will be a good man, and he will be a bad man who employs them badly. We have shown, therefore, that virtue is conversant with pleasures and pains, and that it is increased and corrupted by the same things by which it is produced, when they do not exist after the same manner, and that it likewise energizes about the things from which it originated. CHAPTER 4. It may, however, be doubted what our meaning is in asserting that men by acting justly become just, and temperate by acting temperately. For if they act justly and temperately, they are already just and temperate, just as those who perform things pertaining to grammar and music are grammarians and musicians. Or shall we say that this is not the case in the arts? For it is possible that a man may do something grammatical both from chance and the suggestion of another person. He will, therefore, then be a grammarian if he both does something grammatical and grammatically, that is, according to the grammatical art which he possesses. Again, neither is the thing similar in the arts and the virtues, for things produced by the arts contain in themselves efficient excellence. It is sufficient, therefore, to these to be effected with a certain mode of subsistence. But things which are performed according to the virtues are not done justly or temperately, if they subsist in a certain way, but if he who does them in consequence of being disposed in a certain way. And in the first place, indeed, if he does them knowingly. In the next place, if with deliberate choice, and also deliberately choosing to do them on their own account. And in the third place, if he does them with a firm and immutable disposition of mind. These things, however, are not co-numerated as requisites to the possession of the other arts, except the knowledge of them alone. But to the acquisition of the virtues, the knowledge of them is of little or no efficacy, while the other particulars pertaining to them are capable of effecting no small thing, but are all powerful. And these are obtained from frequently acting justly and temperately. Things, therefore, are said to be just and temperate when they are just as a just or temperate man would perform. But he is a just and temperate man, not who merely does these things, but who does them so as just and temperate men do them. It is well said, therefore, that a man becomes just from acting justly, and temperate from acting temperately, but that from not doing these things, no one will ever become a good man. The multitude, however, do not thus act, but flying to words they fancy they shall philosophize, and thus become worthy characters, acting similarly to sick persons, who attentively indeed hear what the physicians say, but do nothing which they order them to do. As, therefore, these by such a method of cure never have their body in a healthy condition, so neither is the soul of those ever well who thus philosophize. CHAPTER 5. In the next place, we must consider what virtue is. Since, therefore, three things are produced in the soul, viz. Passions, powers, and habits, virtue will be some one of these. But I call passions, indeed, desire, anger, audacity, envy, joy, love, hatred, cupidity, emulation, pity, and, in short, those things to which pleasure or pain are consequent. And I denominate powers those things according to which we are said to be susceptible of the passions, viz. According to which we are able to be angry, or pained, or are inclined to pity. But I call habits those things according to which we are well or ill disposed towards the passions. Thus, for instance, with respect to being angry, if we are vehemently or remissly disposed towards it, we are badly affected. But if moderately, we are well affected. And in a similar manner with respect to the other passions, neither the virtues, therefore, nor the vices are passions, because we are not said to be worthy or depraved according to the passions, but we are said to be so according to the virtues or vices, and because according to the passions we are neither praised nor blamed. For neither he who is afraid, nor he who is angry is praised, nor is he who is simply angry blamed, but he who is angry after a certain manner. But we are praised or blamed according to the virtues and vices. Further still, we may be angry and afraid without any deliberate intention of being so. But the virtues are certain deliberate elections, or are not without deliberate choice. In addition to this also, we are said to be moved according to the passions, but we are not said to be moved according to the virtues and vices, but to be disposed in a certain way. On this account, neither are the virtues powers, for we are neither said to be good nor bad from being able simply to suffer, nor are we through this either praised or blamed. And again, we possess powers indeed from nature, but from nature we do not become either good or bad. We have, however, spoken concerning this before. If, therefore, the virtues are neither passions nor powers, it remains that they are habits, and thus we have shown what virtue is generically. Chapter 6. It is necessary, however, not only to show that virtue is a habit, but likewise to show what kind of a habit it is. We must say, therefore, that every virtue renders that of which it is the virtue well disposed, and causes its work to be well accomplished. Thus, for instance, the virtue of the eye causes both the eye and the work of it to be good. For by the virtue of the eye we see well. In a similar manner the virtue of a horse causes the horse to be good for the race, for carrying his rider, and sustaining the enemy in battle. But if this be the case in all things, the virtue of man will also be a habit from which man becomes good, and from which he accomplishes his own work. And how this indeed will be effected we have already shown. But it will again be now manifest, if we consider what the quality is of the nature of virtue. In everything, therefore, which is continued and divisible, it is possible, indeed, to assume the more, the less, and the equal. And this either with respect to the thing itself, or with reference to us. But the equal is a certain middle between excess and defect. I call, however, the middle of a thing, that which is equally distant from each of the extremes, and which is one and the same in all things. But with reference to us, the middle is that which neither exceeds nor falls short of the becoming. This, however, is neither one nor the same in all things. Thus, for instance, if 10 things are many, but 2 a few, 6 are assumed as a medium with reference to the thing, for 6 equally surpasses and is surpassed. But this is a middle according to arithmetical proportion. The middle or medium, however, with reference to us, is not thus to be assumed. For if to eat 10 pounds is to eat much, but 2 pounds a little, it does not follow that the master of the gymnastic exercises will order 6 pounds to be eaten. For this perhaps will be too much or too little for him who is to take food. For Milo, indeed, it would be too little, but for him who is beginning the exercises it would be too much. And the like must be understood of the course and wrestling. Thus, therefore, every scientific man will avoid excess and defect, but will search for the medium, and make this the object of his choice. He will, however, explore that medium, which is not the middle of the thing, but is a middle with reference to us. If therefore every science thus well accomplishes its work, when it looks to the middle, and refers its work to this, whence it is usual to say of works that are well finished, that nothing can be added to or taken away from them, acknowledging by this that excess and defect corrupt that which is excellent in them, but that mediocrity preserves this. And if good artists, as we say, operate looking to this, but virtue, in the same manner as nature, is more accurate and better than all art, if this be the case, it will tend to the medium as a boundary. I speak, however, of ethical virtue, for this is conversant with passions and actions, but in these there is excess and defect, and the middle. Thus, for instance, it is possible to be afraid, to be confident, to desire and abhor, to be angry and to pity, and, in short, to be pleased and pained in a greater and less degree, and to be both these improperly. But to have these passions when it is proper, and in such things, towards such persons, and for the sake of that which, and as it is proper, this is the middle and the best, and pertains to virtue. In a similar manner also in actions, there is excess and defect, and the middle. But virtue is conversant with passions and actions, in which the excess indeed is erroneous, and the defect is blamed, but the medium is praised, and possesses rectitude, and both these pertain to virtue. Hence, virtue is a certain medium, and tends to the middle as a boundary. Again, to err is manifold, for evil, as the Pythagoreans conjecture, belongs to the infinite, and good to the finite, but it is only possible to act rightly in one way. Hence, the one is easy, but the other difficult. It is easy, indeed, to deviate from the mark, but difficult to hit it, and on this account, excess and defect belong to vice, but the medium to virtue. For simple the good, all various are the bad. Virtue, therefore, is a pre-elective habit, or a habit accompanied with deliberate choice, existing in a medium with reference to us, and which is defined by reason, and in such a way as a prudent man would define it. It is also the medium between two vices, the one being characterized by excess, but the other by defect. And farther still, it is defined by this, that some of the vices fall short of, but others surpass the becoming, both in passions and actions. But virtue both discovers and chooses the medium. Hence, according to the essence, and the definition which explains the very nature of a thing, virtue is a medium, but according to that which is best, and subsists well, it is a summit. Not every action, however, nor every passion receives a medium, for some passions, as soon as they are named, are complicated with depravity, such as malevolence, rejoicing in the evils of others, impudence, envy, and in actions, adultery, theft, and murder. For all these, and others of the like kind, are thus denominated, because they are themselves bad, and not the excesses nor the defects of them. Hence it is not possible at any time to act rightly in these, but they are always attended with error. Nor does acting well, or not acting well, in things of this kind, consist in committing adultery, when, and as it is proper, but simply to do any of these things is to act wrong. To require, therefore, a medium in these, is just as if some one should think it proper that there should be a medium, excess and defect, in doing an injury, and in acting timidly and intemperately. For thus there would be a middle of excess and defect, and an excess of excess, and a deficiency of defect. As, however, there is no excess and defect of temperance and fortitude, because the middle is in a certain respect the summit, so neither is there a middle, excess, and defect, in those passions and actions, but in whatever manner they are exerted, they are attended with error. For, in short, neither is there a middle of excess or defect, nor are there excess and defect of the middle. Chapter 7. It is necessary, however, not only to assert this universally, but also to adapt it to particulars. For in what is said concerning actions, universal assertions indeed are more common, but those that are particular are more true, since actions are conversant with particulars with which assertions ought to accord. These, therefore, are to be assumed from description. Of fear and confidence, therefore, fortitude is the medium. Of the characters, however, which exceed, the one indeed which exceeds by a privation of fear is anonymous, but that which exceeds in confidence is audacious. And he who exceeds in being afraid, but is deficient in confidence, is timid. In pleasures and pains, however, though not in all pleasures, but in such as are corporeal, and in those especially which pertain to the touch, and in a less degree in pains, the medium indeed is temperance, but the excess intemperance. But those who are deficient in the pursuit of pleasures do not very frequently occur, on which account neither have they obtained a name. They may however be called insensate. In giving and receiving money, the medium indeed is liberality, but the excess and defect are prodigality and illiberality, in which men exceed and are deficient in a contrary way. For the prodigal indeed exceeds in spending money, but is deficient in receiving it, and the illiberal man exceeds in receiving, but is deficient in spending money. At present, therefore, we think it sufficient summarily to adumbrate these things, but afterwards we shall discuss them more accurately. With respect to wealth, however, there are other dispositions of the mind, and the medium indeed is magnificence. For the magnificent differs from the liberal man in this, that the former is conversant with greater, but the latter with small things. The excess, however, is an ignorance of elegance and decorum, and illiberal profusion, but the defect is an indecorous parsimony in spending money. And these vices differ from those which surround liberality, but in what they differ we shall afterwards show. With respect to honour and ignominy, the medium indeed is magnanimity, but the excess is called a certain inflation of the mind, and the defect pusillanimity. As we have said, however, that liberality corresponds to magnificence, but differs from it in this, that it is conversant with small things, so to magnanimity, which is conversant with great honour, another certain virtue corresponds, and which also is itself conversant with what is small. For it is possible to aspire after honour in such manner as is proper, and more and less than is proper. But he who exceeds in his desires of honour is said to be ambitious, but he who is deficient is unambitious, and the middle character between both is anonymous. The dispositions also are anonymous, except the disposition of the ambitious man, which is denominated ambition. Hence, the extremes contend for the middle place, and we indeed sometimes call the middle character ambitious, and sometimes unambitious, and sometimes we praise the ambitious, and sometimes the unambitious man. But from what cause we do this will be shown hereafter. Now, however, conformably to the manner in which we begun, let us speak about the rest. With respect to anger, therefore, there is likewise excess, defect, and a medium. But since these are nearly anonymous, we call the middle character a mild man, and the medium mildness. But of the extremes, let him who exceeds be wrathful, and the vice be wrathfulness, and let him who is deficient be a man void of anger, and the defect a privation of anger. There are likewise three other media, which have indeed a certain similitude to each other, but differ from each other. For all of them are conversant with the communion of words and actions, but they differ because one of them is conversant with the truth, which is in them, but the others are conversant with the delectable, and of this, viz. The delectable, one kind consists in jest, but another in all the concerns of life. We must, therefore, also speak concerning these, in order that we may in a greater degree perceive that in every thing the medium is laudable, but the extremes are neither right nor laudable, but reprehensible. Of these, therefore, the greater part also are anonymous, but we must endeavour in the same manner as in the rest to give names to them for the sake of perspicuity, and the facility of understanding what follows. With respect to truth, therefore, the middle character may be called veracious, and the medium truth, but of dissimulation, that kind which exaggerates may be called arrogance, and he who possesses it an arrogant man, and that which extenuates may be called irony, and he who employs it may be denominated ironical, or a dissembler. With respect however to the delectable, and that kind which consists in jest, the middle character, indeed, may be called facetious, and the disposition itself facetiousness. But the excess may be denominated scurrility, and he who possesses it a scurrilous man. And he who is deficient may be called a rustic man, and the habit itself rusticity. In the other species of the delectable, which pertains to the concerns of life, he who delights in such a way as is proper, is a friend, and the medium is friendship. But he who exceeds, if it is not with a view to any advantage, is studious of pleasing, but if for the sake of advantage, is a flatterer. And he who is deficient, and in all things unpleasant, is contentious, and difficult to be pleased. There are, likewise, media in the passions, and in things pertaining to the passions. For bashfulness is not a virtue, and yet the modest man is praised. For in these things, one indeed is called the middle character, another is said to exceed, and another to be deficient. And he indeed who exceeds and is bashful in all things, is as it were astounded. But he who is deficient, and is not ashamed of any thing, is impudent. And the middle character is the modest man. Indignation is a medium between envy and joy for the calamities of others. But these habits are conversant with the pain and pleasure arising from what happens to others. For he who is propense to indignation is indeed pained from those that do well undeservedly. But he who is envious, surpassing the indignant man, is pained from all that do well. And he who rejoices in the calamities of others, is so much deficient in feeling pain from the prosperity of bad men, that he is delighted with it. These things, however, are discussed by us elsewhere, i.e. in the second book of the Rhetoric. With respect to justice, however, since it is not predicated simply, we shall make it the subject of discussion hereafter, viz. The fifth book, and show how each of its parts is a medium. In a similar manner also we shall speak concerning the rational or intellectual virtues in the sixth book. CHAPTER 8. Since, however, there are three dispositions of the soul, two indeed of vices, of which the one subsists according to excess, but the other according to defect, and since virtue is one of these dispositions, and is a medium, all these three dispositions are in a certain respect opposed to all. For the extremes are contrary to the middle, and to each other, but the middle is contrary to the extremes. For as the equal is, with reference to the less, greater, but with reference to the greater, less. Thus the middle habits exceed with reference to the deficiencies, but are defective with reference to the excesses, both in passions and actions. For the brave with reference to the timid man appears to be audacious, but with reference to the audacious man, timid. In a similar manner also, the temperate man with reference to him who is insensate appears to be intemperate, but with reference to the intemperate man, insensate. But the liberal, when contrasted with the illiberal man, appears to be a prodigal, but when compared with the prodigal, illiberal. Hence, the extremes propel the medium each to the other, and the timid calls indeed the brave man audacious, but the audacious man calls him timid, and analogously in the other extremes. These, however, being thus opposed to each other, there is a greater contrariety in the extremes to each other than to the medium. For these are more remote from each other than from the medium, just as the great is more remote from the small, and the small from the great, than both of them from the equal. Farther still, in some extremes there appears to be a certain similitude to the medium, as in audacity to fortitude, and in prodigality to liberality, but in the extremes there is the greatest dissimilitude to each other. Things, however, which are very distant from each other are defined to be contraries, so that those things which are more distant are more contrary to each other. But to the medium, in some things indeed, the deficiency is more opposed, and in others the excess. Thus to fortitude, audacity, indeed, which is an excess, is not opposed, but timidity, which is a defect. And to temperance, the want of sensibility, which is an indigence, is not opposed, but intemperate, which is an excess. This, however, happens from two causes, one indeed from the thing itself. For one of the extremes being near to, and more similar to the medium than the other. Hence not this, but the contrary is more opposed to it. Thus, for instance, since audacity appears to be more similar and nearer to fortitude, but timidity appears to be more dissimilar, on this account we oppose the latter to fortitude, rather than the former. For things which are more distant from the medium appear to be more contrary. This, therefore, is one cause from the thing itself, but another cause is from ourselves. For those vices, to which we are naturally more adapted, appear to be more contrary to the medium. Thus, because we are naturally more adapted to pleasures, we are more easily impelled to intemperance, than to moderation in the pursuit of pleasure. Those things, therefore, are said to be in a greater degree contraries to which a greater accession is made. And on this account intemperance, which is an excess, is more contrary to temperance, than the other extreme. CHAPTER 9. That ethical virtue, therefore, is a medium, and how it is so, and that it is a medium between two vices, the one existing according to excess, but the other according to defect, and that it is such in consequence of looking to the medium in passions and actions as to a mark, has been sufficiently shown. Hence, also, it is laborious to be worthy, for in every thing it is laborious to obtain the middle. Thus the middle of a circle cannot be discovered by every one, but by him who is skilled in geometry. In like manner to be angry, and to give and spend money, is in the power of every one, and is easy. But to be angry, and to give and spend money to whom, and as much, and when, and on what account, and as it is proper, cannot be accomplished by every one, nor is it easy. For this is to act rightly, and is rare, and laudable, and beautiful. Hence it is necessary that he whose attention is directed to the medium as to a mark should first recede from that which is more contrary, as Calypso also admonishes, far from the smoke and waves direct the helm. For, of the extremes, the one indeed is more erroneous, but the other less. Since therefore it is difficult to obtain the medium accurately, by making a second navigation, as they say, the least of the evils must be assumed, but this will especially be effected in the way we have mentioned. It is likewise requisite to consider what the vices are to which we are most propense. For different men are naturally prone to different vices, but this will be known from the pleasure and pain with which we are affected. We ought, however, to draw ourselves to the contrary part, for by removing ourselves very far from error, we shall arrive at the medium, which those do who straighten distorted pieces of wood. But in every thing we should especially avoid the delectable and pleasure, for we are not uncorrupted judges of it. In the same manner, therefore, as the Trojan nobles were affected towards Helen, we ought to be affected towards pleasure, and in every thing, where pleasure is concerned, to employ their decision. For thus, by dismissing it, we shall err in a less degree. By thus acting, therefore, in short, we shall be especially able to obtain the medium. Perhaps, however, this is difficult, and principally in particulars, for it is not easy to determine how, and with whom, and on what account, and for how long a time, it is requisite to be angry. For we indeed sometimes praise those who are defective in anger, and call them mild, but at other times we praise those who are exasperated, and call them virile. He, however, who deviates but a little from rectitude, whether he inclines in the more or the less, is not blamed. But he who deviates much from it, for the error of such a one is not latent. It cannot, however, be easily determined to what extent and how much he is blamable, as neither is this easy in any other sensible thing. But things of this kind rank among particulars, and the judgment of them pertains to sense. Thus much, therefore, is indeed manifest, that the middle habit is in all things laudable, and that it is necessary at one time to incline to excess, and at another to deficiency, for thus we shall easily obtain the medium, and rectitude of conduct. End of Book 2. Book 3. Chapter 1. Since, therefore, virtue is conversant with passions and actions, and praise and blame accompany things of a voluntary nature, but pardon and sometimes pity, such as are involuntary, it is perhaps necessary that those who speculate concerning virtue should define the voluntary and involuntary. This will also be useful to legislators, in conferring rewards and inflicting punishments. But those actions appear to be involuntary which are done by force, or through ignorance. And the violent is, that the principle of which is external, being of such a nature, that it contributes nothing to the advantage of him who acts, or of him who suffers; as if, for instance, the wind, or men who are the masters of some one, should bring him to a certain place. With respect to such things, however, as are performed through the fear of greater evils, or for the sake of something beautiful in conduct, as if a tyrant who is the lord of parents and children, should command one to do a certain base action, and on these conditions, that if he did it, his parents and children should be saved, but if he did not, they should die; with respect to such things as these, it is dubious whether they are voluntary or involuntary. Something of the like kind also happens in losses at sea, when in a tempest the goods of the ship are thrown overboard. For simply considered, no one throws them into the sea willingly, but every one who is endued with intellect does so for his own safety, and that of the rest of the crew. Such like actions, therefore, are mixed, but they are more similar to voluntary actions, for they are then eligible when they are performed, but the end of the action is according to opportunity. A thing, therefore, must be said to be done voluntarily or involuntarily, then when it is done. But he threw his goods into the sea voluntarily. For the principle of moving the organic parts in such like actions is in the man himself. But those things of which the principle is in himself, he has the power to perform or not. Such things, therefore, are voluntary. Simply considered, however, they are perhaps involuntary. For no one would choose any one of these on its own account. But in such like actions, men are sometimes praised, when they endure something disgraceful or painful for the sake of great and beautiful circumstances; and if they do otherwise, they are blamed. For to endure the most disgraceful things, with a view to nothing beautiful or moderate, is the part of a bad man. To other things, however, no praise is given, but pardon is granted to them, when a man does what he ought not to do, in consequence of being compelled by such things as surpass human nature, and which no one can endure. And perhaps there are some things which we ought never to do by any compulsion, but we ought to suffer the most dreadful evils, and die rather than do them. For those circumstances appear to be ridiculous which compelled the Alcmaeon of Euripides to kill his mother. It is, however, sometimes difficult to judge what is to be chosen in preference to something else, and whether this is to be endured instead of that. And it is still more difficult to persevere in our decisions, since, for the most part, things which are expected are attended with molestation, and things which we are compelled to do are base. Hence, both praise and blame are given to those that act from compulsion, and to those who do not. What kind of things, therefore, are to be called violent? Shall we say that they are then simply to be called so, when the cause is in things external, and the agent contributes nothing to the action? But things which are of themselves involuntary, indeed, but are now eligible, and are eligible instead of certain other things, and the principle of which is in the agent, these are of themselves indeed involuntary, but now, and instead of certain other things, are voluntary. They are, however, more similar to voluntary actions, for actions are conversant with particulars, and these are voluntarily performed. It is not, however, easy to show what things are to be chosen in preference to others, for there are many differences in particulars. But if it should be said, that things delectable and beautiful are violent, for they compel us to act, being external; if this should be said, all things will thus be violent. For all men do everything for the sake of these. And those, indeed, who act from violence and unwillingly, act painfully. But those who are influenced by the delectable, act with pleasure. It is therefore ridiculous for a man to accuse external things, and not himself, when he is easily captivated by things of this kind, and to consider himself as the cause of beautiful actions, but delectable things as the causes of his base actions. Hence, the violent appears to be that the principle of which is external, and to which the thing compelled contributes nothing. Every thing, however, which is done from ignorance is not voluntary, but that is involuntary which is attended with pain and repentance. For he who does any thing from ignorance, and is not at all indignant with the action, does not indeed perform it willingly, because he acts from ignorance; nor yet again does he perform it unwillingly, in consequence of feeling no pain from the action. Of those, therefore, who act from ignorance, he who repents of what he has done appears to have acted unwillingly; but he who does not repent, since he is a different character from the other, may be said to have acted not willingly. For since he is a different character, it is better that he should have a proper name. To act from ignorance, likewise, appears to be a different thing from acting ignorantly. For he who is intoxicated or enraged does not appear to act from ignorance, but from some one of the above mentioned circumstances, yet not knowingly, but ignorantly. Every depraved man, therefore, is ignorant what ought to be done, and from what actions he should abstain. And from error of this kind, men become unjust, and in short bad. But an action ought to be called involuntary, not if he who does it is ignorant of what is advantageous. For ignorance in the deliberate choice of a thing is not the cause of involuntary conduct, but of depravity. Nor is the ignorance of universal the cause of it. For men are blamed on this account, but it arises from the ignorance of particulars, in which, and about which, every action is conversant. For in these there is pity and pardon, since he who is ignorant of any one of these, acts involuntarily. Perhaps, however, it will not be amiss to define what, and how many, the particular circumstances are which render an action involuntary. They are therefore the circumstance of the principal agent, the circumstance of the instrumental agent, the circumstance of the end, and the circumstances of the action itself. No one, therefore, will be ignorant of all these unless he is insane. But it is evident that neither will he who acts be ignorant of them. For how can he be ignorant of himself? A man, however, may be ignorant of what he does, as is the case with those who say that they have spoken unawares, or that they did not know what they said was arcane, as Aeschylus with respect to the mysteries, or as when someone throws a catapulta, not knowing what he throws. A person, also, may fancy, like Merope, that a sun is an enemy, and that a spear which has a sharp point is blunt like a ball, or that a stone is a pumice. A man, likewise, striking another with a view to his safety, may kill him, and, wishing to show the mode of exercise in wrestling, he may strike him whom he wished to instruct. As there is ignorance, therefore, in all these particulars in which there is action, he who is ignorant of some one of them appears to have acted involuntarily, and especially in those things which are of principal importance. But those appear to be of principal importance in which there is action, and that for the sake of which action is undertaken. Since the involuntary, therefore, is denominated from an ignorance of this kind, it is besides this necessary, that the action should be painful, and attended with repentance. But as the involuntary is that which is done from violence, and through ignorance, the voluntary will appear to be that of which the principle is in the agent, who knows the particulars in which the action consists. For perhaps it is not well said, that actions which are produced through anger or desire are involuntary. For in the first place, indeed, if this were admitted, no other animal would act voluntarily, nor would children. And in the next place, whether are any of the actions which we perform through the influence of desire or anger done by us voluntarily? Or shall we say that worthy actions are performed by us voluntarily, but base actions involuntarily? Or would not this be ridiculous, since there is one cause of both of these? Perhaps too it is absurd to call those things involuntary, after which it is requisite to aspire. But it is necessary to be angry with certain things, and to desire others, such as health and discipline. It appears, however, that things involuntary are painful, but that those which are the objects of desire are delectable. Again, what difference is there between the errors which are caused by reason or by anger, with respect to their being involuntary? For both are to be avoided. The irrational passions also do not appear to be less human, But the actions of man proceed both from anger and desire. It would be absurd, therefore, to consider these as involuntary. CHAPTER 2. Having therefore defined the voluntary and involuntary, it follows that we should discuss pre^election, or deliberate choice. For deliberate choice appears to be most aligned to virtue, and by this, as a rule, a judgment may be formed of manners more than by actions. Deliberate choice, therefore, appears indeed to be a voluntary thing, yet it is not the same with what is voluntary, but the voluntary is more extended. For of the voluntary, children and other animals partake, but they do not partake of deliberate choice. And we say, indeed, that things which we do suddenly are done voluntarily, but not according to deliberate choice. But those who call it desire, or anger, or will, or a certain opinion, do not appear to speak rightly. For deliberate choice is not common to us and irrational animals, but desire and anger are. And the incontinent man, indeed, acts from the influence of desire, but not from deliberate choice. On the contrary, the continent man acts from deliberate choice, and not from the impulse of desire. And desire, indeed, is contrary to deliberate choice, but desire is not contrary to desire. Desire likewise is conversant both with that which is delectable and that which is painful. But deliberate choice is neither conversant with the painful nor the delectable. Much less is deliberate choice anger. For in the smallest degree do things which are affected through anger appear to be affected by deliberate choice. Nor yet is it will, though will appears to be near to it. For deliberate choice, indeed, is not among the number of things impossible. And if any one should say that he deliberately chooses impossibilities, he would appear to be stupid. The will, however, is directed to things which are impossible, as for instance to immortality. And the will, indeed, is also conversant with things which can by no means be accomplished by him who wills, as that a certain player or person engaged in athletic contests may be victorious. No one, however, deliberately chooses things of this kind, but only such as he thinks can be effected through himself. Farther still, the will, indeed, is more directed to the end, but deliberate choice to things pertaining to the end. Thus, we wish to be well, but we deliberately choose those things through which we become well. And we wish indeed to be happy, and we say that this is our wish, but it is not fit to say that we deliberately choose to be happy. For, in short, deliberate choice appears to be conversant with the things that are in our power. Neither, therefore, will deliberate choice be opinion, for opinion, indeed, appears to be conversant with all things, and no less with things eternal and impossible, than with things in our power. Opinion, likewise, is divided into the false and the true, and not into good and evil. But deliberate choice is rather divided into the latter than into the former. In short, therefore, perhaps no one will say that deliberate choice is either the same with opinion in general, or with some particular opinion. For by deliberately choosing good or evil, we become affected with a certain quality, but this does not happen to us through forming an opinion. And we deliberately choose indeed to obtain or avoid, or to do something of the like kind. But we form an opinion of what it is, or to what it is advantageous, or in what manner, and we do not very much opine to obtain or avoid it. And deliberate choice indeed is praised, because it pertains to that of which it is necessary to partake more abundantly, or with rectitude, but opinion is praised for its truth. We likewise deliberately choose those things which we especially know to be good, but we form an opinion of things which are not very much known to us. And the same persons do not appear to deliberately choose and opine the most excellent things, but some indeed opine that which is better, but from vice choose those things which ought not to be the objects of choice. It is, however, of no consequence whether opinion precedes or follows deliberate choice. For our attention is not directed to this, but to the consideration whether deliberate choice is the same with a certain opinion. What then, or what kind of a thing is deliberate choice, since it is no one of the above mentioned particulars? It appears, therefore, to be a voluntary thing. Not every thing, however, which is voluntary is the object of deliberate choice, but that which has been the subject of previous deliberation. For deliberate choice is accompanied with reason, and the discursive energy of reason. And this the name appears to signify, the object of deliberate choice being that which is eligible in preference to other things. CHAPTER 3. But whether do men consult about all things? And is everything a subject of consultation? Or about certain things is there no consultation? Perhaps, however, that must be called a subject of consultation, not about which some stupid or insane person consults, but which is an object of consultation to a man endued with intellect. Concerning eternal things, however, no one consults, such as concerning the world, or the diagonal and side of a square, because they are incommensurable. Nor does any one consult about things which are in motion, but which are always passing into existence, after the same manner, whether from necessity, or naturally, or from some other cause, such as conversions and risings. Nor does any one consult about things which subsist differently at different times, such as about drought and rain, nor about fortuitous events, such as the discovery of a treasure, nor yet about all human concerns. For no Lacedaemonian consults how the polity of the Scythians may be governed in the best manner, since none of these things can be effected by us. But we consult about things which can be performed by us. And these are the rest of things which we have not mentioned. For nature, necessity, and fortune appear to be causes, and besides these intellect, and everything which energizes through man. The individuals, however, of the human species consult about things which may be performed by them. And indeed, in those sciences which are accurate and sufficient to themselves, there is no consultation. As, for instance, there is no consultation about letters, for there is no contention how we should write, but such things as are effected by us. Yet, not always after the same manner, about these we consult, as about things pertaining to medicine, and the art of procuring money, and about the art of the pilot, more than about the gymnastic art, because the former is much less accurate than the latter. In a similar manner also, we consult about the rest, but we consult more in the arts than in the sciences, for we dissent more about them. Consultation, however, takes place in things which have a frequency of subsistence, but of which the event is immanifest, and in things in which there is the indefinite. In things also which are of great importance, we employ counsellors, distrusting our own judgment as not sufficient. We consult, however, not about ends, but about things pertaining to ends. For neither does a physician consult whether he shall heal the sick, nor a rhetorician whether he shall persuade, nor the politician whether he shall establish equitable legislation. Nor does any one of the remaining characters consult about the end, but proposing a certain end, they consider how and by what means it may be obtained. If also it appears that this end is to be obtained through many media, they consider through which of them it may be obtained in the easiest and best manner. But if through one medium, they consider how it may be accomplished through this, and through what likewise this may be obtained, until they arrive at the first cause, which is discovered in the last place. For he who consults appears to investigate and analyze in the above mentioned manner, as if he were investigating and analyzing a diagram. It appears, however, that not every investigation is a consultation. For mathematical inquiries are not consultations. But every consultation is an investigation, and that which is last in analysis is first in generation. And if, indeed, in consulting, we meet with an impossibility, we desist from consultation, as if there should be occasion for money, and this cannot be procured. But if that about which we consult appears to be possible, then we endeavour to obtain it. Those things, however, are possible which may be accomplished through ourselves. For things which are accomplished through our friends are in a certain respect effected through ourselves, since the principle is in us. But at one time instruments are explored, and at another time the use of them, and in a similar manner in other things, at one time, indeed, that being investigated through which the end may be obtained, and at another time the manner. Man, therefore, as we have said, appears to be the principle of actions, but consultation is about things which may be performed by man, and actions are for the sake of other things. Hence, the end will not be the object of consultation, but things which pertain to ends. Neither, therefore, will particulars be the objects of consultation, as whether this thing is bread, or is well baked, or is made as it ought to be, for these things pertain to sense. But if a man always consults, there will be a procession to infinity. The object of consultation, however, and the pre-eligible, or object of deliberate choice, are the same, except that the object of pre-election or deliberate choice is something which is now definite. For the pre-eligible is that which is preferred from consultation. For every one ceases to investigate how he shall act, when he has reduced the principle to himself, and to that part of himself which ranks as the leader, since this part is that which he deliberately chooses. But this also is evident from the ancient polities which Homer has imitated. For the kings of these polities announced to the people what they had deliberately chosen to do. Since, however, that which is pre-eligible is an object of consultation, appetible of things which are in our power, pre-election also, or deliberate choice, will be an appetite of or tendency to things in our power, accompanied with consultation. For, forming a judgment in consequence of having consulted, we desire conformably to consultation. We have, therefore, adumbrated what pre-election is, and what the things are with which it is conversant, and have shown that it belongs to things which have reference to ends. CHAPTER 4. That will, however, pertains to the end, we have shown. But this end to some persons appears to be the good, and to others apparent good. But it happens to those who say that the object of the will is the good, that what he wills who does not choose rightly is not an object of will. For if it were an object of will, it would also be good. It may, however, happen to be bad, and it happens to those who say that the object of the will is apparent good, that the object of the will has not a natural subsistence, but is what appears to any one to be eligible. A different thing, however, appears to be eligible to a different person, and if it should so happen, contraries appear to be eligible. If, therefore, these things are not approved, we must say that simply and in reality the good is indeed the object of the will, but that apparent good is the object of the will to every one. To the worthy man, therefore, real good is the object of the will, but to the bad man, casual good, just as in bodies, to such as are well disposed. Those things are salubrious which are in reality so, but other things to such as are diseased. And the like takes place in things that are bitter, sweet, hot, heavy, and each of the rest. For the worthy man judges of every thing, rightly, and in every thing the truth presents itself to his view. For, according to every habit, there are things beautiful and delectable, which are peculiar to that habit. And perhaps the worthy man very much excels others in this, that he sees the truth in everything, being as it were the rule and measure of things. But with the multitude, deception is present on account of pleasure. For pleasure, though not good, appears to be so. The multitude, therefore, choose the delectable as good, but fly from pain as an evil. CHAPTER 5. Since the end, therefore, is the object of the will, but things pertaining to the end are the objects of consultation and deliberate choice, the actions which are conversant with these will be actions of deliberate choice and voluntary. But with these the energies of the virtues are conversant. Virtue, therefore, also is in our power, and in a similar manner vice. For in those things in which to act is in our power, not to act is also in our power. And in those things in which we have the power not to act, we have likewise the power to act. Hence, if to act worthily is in our power, not to act basely will likewise be in our power. And if we have the power of not acting worthily, we have also the power of acting basely. But if to act, and in a similar manner, not to act worthily and basely are in our power, and this is to be good or bad, it will be in our power to be worthy or depraved characters. and to say, with a certain tragic poet, that no one is willingly depraved, nor unwillingly blessed, seems to be partly false and partly true. For no one is unwillingly blessed, but depravity is voluntary. Or unless this is admitted, what we have just now asserted must be controverted, and it must not be said that man is the principle and generator of actions in the same manner as he is of children. But if these things are admitted, and we cannot refer them to any other principles than those which are in our power, it follows that those things are in our power, and are voluntary, of which also the principles are in our power. The truth of this appears to be attested both privately by individuals and publicly by legislators themselves. For they castigate and punish those who act depravely, if they do not act from compulsion or from ignorance of which they were not the causes. But they honour those who act well in order that they may excite these, and impede those. No one, however, exhorts others to the performance of such actions as are neither in our power nor are voluntary, because no advantage can be derived from persuading us not to be hot, or be in pain, or be hungry, or anything else of the like kind. For, notwithstanding the persuasion, we shall no less suffer these things. For legislators also punish a man for his ignorance, if he appears to be the cause of his ignorance. Thus double punishments are ordained for those that are intoxicated. For the principle is in themselves, because they have the power of not becoming intoxicated, and this, i.e. intoxication, is the cause of their ignorance. They likewise punish those who are ignorant of anything which is legally established, which ought to be known, and which it is not difficult to know. And in a similar manner in other things, which men appear to be ignorant of from negligence, and of which it is in their power not to be ignorant. For it is in our power to pay attention to what ought to be known. Perhaps, however, it may be said that a man is a person of such a character that he cannot pay attention, but such persons are themselves the causes of their characteristic qualities in consequence of living negligently. The causes likewise of men being unjust or intemperate are in themselves in consequence of the former acting wickedly, and of the latter spending their time in drinking, and things of the like kind. For energies in everything render those who employ them similar to such energies. This, however, is evident from those who exercise themselves in any contest or action, for they persevere in energizing. To be ignorant, therefore, that in everything from energizing about the thing habits are produced, is the province of a very insensate man. Again, it is absurd to suppose that he who acts unjustly is unwilling to be unjust, or that he who acts intemperately is unwilling to be intemperate. But if any one does those things from which he will be unjust, not ignorantly, he will be unjust willingly. Nevertheless, though he should wish, he will not cease to be unjust, and become just. For neither does he who is diseased become well by wishing to be so, even though it should happen that he is voluntarily diseased, by living intemperately and disobeying his physicians. Prior, therefore, to his living intemperately, it was in his power not to be diseased. But after having abandoned himself to intemperance, it was no longer possible, as neither is it possible for him who has thrown a stone to resume it. At the same time it was in his power to emit from his hand and hurl the stone, for he contained the principle of action in himself. Thus, also, to the unjust and intemperate man it was possible from the beginning not to be unjust and intemperate, on which account they are voluntarily so, but when they are become such characters, it is no longer possible for them not to be so. Not only, however, the vices of the soul are voluntary, but in some persons also the vices of the body, which likewise we reprehended. For no one reprehends those who are naturally deformed, but we blame those who are so through the want of exercise, and from negligence. The like also takes place in imbecility and mutilation. For no one would reproach a man who is blind from nature, or disease, or a blow, but would rather pity him. But every one would reprove him who is blind from drinking wine to excess, or from any other species of intemperance. Of the vices, therefore, pertaining to the body, those indeed that are in our power are blamed, but those which are not reprehended. But if this be the case, in other things also the vices which are reprehended will be in our power. If, however, some one should say that all men aspire after apparent good, but that we have no authority over the phantasy, and that such as every one is, such also does the end appear to him to be; if, indeed, every one is to himself in a certain respect the cause of habit, he will also be in a certain respect the cause to himself of the phantasy, i.e. of the conception which he forms of a thing in his imagination. But if no one is the cause to himself of bad conduct, but he acts evilly from an ignorance of the end, fancying that by so acting he shall obtain the greatest good, and if the desire of the end is not spontaneous, but it is requisite that every one should be born endued as it were with sight, by which he may judge rightly, and may choose real good; and if, also, he is naturally of a good disposition, in whom this is well implanted by nature, for that which is greatest and most beautiful, and which can neither be obtained nor learned from another person, but which such as a man is naturally, such he possesses, and to be naturally inclined to this well and beautifully, will be a perfect and true natural goodness of disposition. If these things are true, why will virtue more than vice be voluntary? For the end appears, and is similarly posited both to the good and the bad man, either by nature or in some other way. But referring other things to this, they act in any manner whatever. Whether, therefore, the end, whatever it may be, is not apparent to every one from nature, but there is also something with him who acts, or whether the end is natural, yet, because a worthy man performs other things voluntarily, and therefore virtue is voluntary, vice also will be no less voluntary. For in a bad as well as in a good man, there is similarly a power of acting from himself in what he does, though the intention of the end is not in our power. If, therefore, as we have said, the virtues are voluntary, for we ourselves in a certain respect are the concauses of habits, and in consequence of being disposed in a certain way, we propose to ourselves a certain end. If this be the case, the vices also will be voluntary, for a similar reason. We have, therefore, spoken in common concerning the virtues, have adumbrated the genus of them, and have shown that they are media and habits. We have likewise unfolded what the things are from which they are produced, and have shown that they are caused by energies, and are the principles of energies, similar to those by which they are generated. That they are likewise in our power, and are voluntary things, and this in such a way as right reason shall ordain. Actions, however, and habits are not similarly voluntary, for of actions we are the lords from the beginning to the end, since we have a knowledge of particulars, but of habits we are only lords of the principle. The accession, however, of particulars is not known as it is in diseases, but because it is in our power thus to use, or not to use particulars, on this account our habits are voluntary. Resuming, therefore, the discussion of each of the virtues, let us show what they are, what the quality of the things is with which they are conversant, and how they subsist. But at the same time it will be manifest how many there are. And, in the first place, let us consider fortitude. Chapter 6. That fortitude, therefore, is indeed a medium which is conversant with fear and audacity, has been already observed by us. But we evidently fear things of a terrible nature, and these are, in short, evils. Hence, also, fear is defined to be the expectation of evil. We fear, therefore, all things that are evil, such as infamy, poverty, disease, the want of friends, and death. The brave man, however, does not appear to be conversant with all evils. For it is necessary and beautiful to be afraid of some things, and not to be afraid of them is base. As, for instance, not to be afraid of infamy. For he who is afraid of this is a worthy and modest man, but he who is not afraid of it is impudent. He is, however, metaphorically called by some a brave man, for he has something similar to the brave man, since the brave man also is fearless. But perhaps it is not proper to fear poverty or disease, or, in short, such things as neither proceed from vice nor from ourselves, yet neither is he who is fearless with respect to these a brave man. We denominate him, however, brave from similitude, for some men who in the dangers of war are timid, are liberal, and possess a proper confidence in the loss of money. Neither, therefore, is he timid who dreads insolent conduct towards his children and wife, or envy, or anything of the like kind, nor is he a brave man if he is confident when he is about to be whipped. With what kind of dreadful things, therefore, is the brave man conversant? Shall we say with such as are the greatest? For no one endures dreadful things better, but death is the most dreadful of things, for it is the end of life, and nothing farther appears to remain for him who is dead, either good or bad. But neither does the brave man appear to be conversant with every kind of death, as for instance, death in the sea, or from disease. With what kinds of death, therefore, is he conversant? Shall we not say, with those that are most beautiful? But these are the deaths which happen in war, for such a death is attended with the greatest and most beautiful danger. And the truth of this is confirmed by the honours which cities and monarchs confer on those who conduct themselves bravely in war. He, therefore, may properly be called a brave man who is intrepid with respect to a beautiful death, and such things as are the causes of death when they are near. But things of this kind are especially such as happen in war. Nevertheless, in the sea, and in diseases, the brave man is intrepid, yet not in the same manner as sailors are. For brave men, when they despair of their safety, indignantly bear a death of this kind, but sailors have good hope of escaping from their experience. At the same time, brave men act with fortitude in those things in which strength of mind is requisite, or it is beautiful to die, but neither of these exists in such like destructions as we have mentioned. CHAPTER 7. The same thing, however, is not terrible to all men. But we say that there is also something which is above man. This, therefore, is indeed terrible to every one endued with intellect. But the terrible things which do not exceed the endurance of human nature differ in magnitude, and in the more and the less. And the like takes place in things pertaining to confidence. The brave man, however, is unterrified as a man. He will therefore, indeed, dread things of this kind, yet in such a manner as is proper and as reason prescribes, for the sake of the beautiful in conduct, for this is the end of virtue. But it is possible to be terrified at these in a greater and less degree, and it is also possible to dread things which are not dreadful, as if they were so. Of the errors, however, in the endurance of things terrible, one consists in dreading what it is not proper to dread, another in dreading not as is proper, but another in not dreading when it is proper, or something of this kind. And in a similar manner in what pertains to confidence. He therefore who endures and fears things which it is requisite to endure and fear, and for the sake of that for which it is requisite, and in such a way as and when it is requisite, and in a similar manner, he who thus confides is a brave man, for the brave man suffers and acts according to the importance of the thing, and conformably to reason. But the end of every energy is the end according to habit, i.e. the beautiful in conduct. And to the brave man fortitude is beautiful. The end also is a thing of this kind, for everything is defined by the end. For the sake of the beautiful in conduct, therefore, the brave man endures and performs all that pertains to fortitude. Of the characters, however, which exceed, he indeed who exceeds in fearlessness is anonymous, but it has been before observed by us that many things are anonymous. He, however, who fears nothing, neither earthquakes nor inundations, as it is said of the Celtae, will be an insane person, or one who has no sense of pain. But he who exceeds in confidence respecting things of a terrible nature will be audacious. The audacious man also appears to be arrogant, and a pretender to fortitude. Such therefore as the brave man is with respect to things of a terrible nature, such does the audacious man wish to appear, and hence in those things in which he is able, he imitates him. On this account also, many audacious persons have timidity united with audacity. For in consequence of their audacity when danger is not imminent, they do not endure things of a dreadful nature when they occur. But he who exceeds in fearing is timid, for he fears what he ought not, and in such a manner as he ought not to fear, and all such things are consequent to him. But he is deficient in confiding. As he exceeds, however, in pains he is more apparent. The timid man, therefore, is hopeless, for he fears all things. But the brave man is the contrary. For confidence is the province of the man who hopes for the best. The timid, the audacious, and the brave man, therefore are conversant with the same things, but they are differently affected towards them. For the timid and the audacious man exceed and are deficient. But the brave man is disposed towards things dreadful in the middle way, and in such a manner as is proper. And audacious men, indeed, are precipitate, and wish to encounter dangers before they arrive, but when they arrive they are deficient in fortitude. Brave men, however, are ardent in encountering danger, and before it arrives they are quiet. As we have said, therefore, fortitude is a medium conversant with those things of a dreadful nature, and such as pertain to confidence, which we have mentioned, and it chooses and endures them, because it is beautiful to do so, or not to do so is base. But to die in order to avoid poverty, or on account of love, or something painful, is not the province of a brave, but rather of a timid man. For it is effeminate to fly from things laborious, and such do not endure death because it is beautiful to endure it, but in order to fly from evil. Fortitude, therefore, is a certain thing of this kind. Chapter 8. Other kinds of fortitude also are denominated according to 4 modes. And in the first place, indeed, political fortitude, since this most resembles fortitude truly so called. For citizens appear to endure dangers on account of the punishments and disgrace inflicted by the laws, and also on account of the honours they confer. Hence the most brave men appear to be found among those with whom the timid are disgraced, and the brave are honoured. Homer likewise introduces such persons, as for instance Diomed and Hector. Shall proud Polydamas before the gate proclaim, his counsels are obeyed too late, which timely followed but the former night, what numbers had been saved by Hector's flight? And Diomed, But what grief should haughty Hector boast, I fled inglorious to the guarded coast. This species of fortitude, however, is especially similar to the before mentioned, because it is produced from virtue, for it is generated through shame, and a desire of the beautiful in conduct. For it is through a desire of honour, and a flight from disgrace, which is dishonourable. Those also may be ranked among brave men, who are compelled to be brave by their rulers. But they are inferior to the former, i.e. the politically brave, because their conduct is not produced through shame, but through fear, and is not the consequence of flying from what is base, but from what is painful, for they are compelled by their masters. Thus Hector, On rushed bold Hector, gloomy as the night, Forbids to plunder, animates the fight, Points to the fleet, for by the gods, who flies, who dares but linger, by this hand he dies. No weeping sister his cold eye shall close, no friendly hand his funeral pile compose. Who stops to plunder at this signal hour, the birds shall tear him, and the dogs devour. And the generals scourge the soldiers if they desert their ranks. The same thing also is done by those who dispose their troops before fosses, and adopt other methods of the like kind, for all these employ force. It is necessary, however, not to be brave from necessity, but because it is beautiful to be so. But experience about particulars appears to be a certain fortitude. Whence also Socrates thought that fortitude was a science. And, indeed, there are other such persons in other things. But soldiers are such in warlike affairs. For it seems that there are many vain terrors in war, of which soldiers are especially aware. Soldiers, therefore, appear to be brave, because other persons do not understand the nature of these alarms. In the next place, they are especially able, from their experience, to attack their enemies without receiving any injury themselves. They also know how to guard against and strike their enemies, in consequence of being able to use their arms, and having armour of such a kind as is most excellent for the purpose of attacking, without being injured by their adversaries. They fight, therefore, like armed with unarmed men, and like athletes with those that are unskilled in athletic exercises. For in such like contests, not the most brave are the most adapted to fight, but those who are most strong, and those whose bodies are in the most excellent condition. But soldiers become timid when the danger is excessive, and they are deficient in numbers and warlike apparatus. For the merely skilful are the first that fly, but those who act bravely, according to political circumstances, die remaining at their post, as it happened at the Hermaeus, since to citizens flight is base, and death is more eligible than such a preservation. But the soldiers, in this battle at Hermaeus, encountered the danger at first, as thinking themselves superior to their enemies, but when they saw the full extent of the danger, they fled, dreading death more than disgrace. The brave man, however, is not a person of this description. Anger also is referred to fortitude, for men likewise appear to be brave on account of anger, just as wild beasts rush on those that wound them, because brave men also are irascible. Whence Homer says, quote, "Strength be to anger added, and his ardour and his wrath he roused, and pungent fury from his nostrils flowed, and his blood boiled." Close quote. For everything of this kind appears to signify the energy and impulse of anger. Brave men, therefore, act on account of the beautiful in conduct, but anger co-operates with them. And savage animals act through the influence of pain, for they act because they are wounded or terrified, since if they are in a wood, or in a marsh, they do not attack anyone. Hence, those persons are not brave who are impelled to danger by pain and anger, foreseeing nothing that is dreadful, since thus asses also would be brave when they are hungry, for they cannot, even by blows, be driven from their pasture. Adulterers, likewise, perform many audacious deeds through their lustful desire. Those, therefore, are not brave who are impelled to danger through pain or anger. The fortitude, however, appears to be most natural, which subsists on account of anger, and which assumes deliberate choice, and that for the sake of which a thing is done, or the final cause. Men also when they are angry are pained, but are delighted when they take vengeance on the authors of their anger. Those, however, who act under the influence of these causes, are indeed pugnacious, but not brave, for they do not act with a view to the beautiful in conduct, nor from the dictates of reason, but from the influence of passion. But they possess something similar to fortitude. Nor yet are those who are full of good hope brave, for in consequence of having frequently conquered, and conquered many, they are confident in dangers. But they are similar to brave men, because both these characters are confident. Brave men, however, are indeed confident for the reasons we have already assigned, but these because they fancy they are superior to others, and that they shall suffer no evil from their opponents. Those also that are intoxicated act after this manner, for they become full of good hope, but when they are frustrated of their expectations, they fly from danger. It is, however, the province of a brave man to endure things which are, and appear to be dreadful to men, because it is beautiful to do so, and base not to endure them. Hence also it appears to be the part of a more brave man to be fearless and without perturbation in sudden terrors, rather than in such as were foreseen. For this rather proceeds from habit, and in a less degree from preparation. For things, indeed, which were foreseen, may be chosen from deliberation and reason, but in things which suddenly happen, a man can only conduct himself fearlessly from the habit of fortitude. Those persons, likewise, appear to be brave who are ignorant of danger, and they are not very remote from those who are full of good hope. They are, however, inferior to them, because they have no preconceived opinion of vanquishing the evil, but the former have. Hence the fortitude of those who are full of good hope continues for a certain time, but the fortitude of those who are ignorant of danger ceases as soon as the deception is apparent, as was the case with the Argives, when they met with the Lacedaemonians, and thought them to be Sicyonians. And thus we have shown what kind of men the brave are, and those who appear to be brave. CHAPTER 9. Since, however, fortitude is conversant with confidence and fear, yet it is not similarly conversant with both, but in a greater degree with things of a terrible nature. For he who is without perturbation in these, and who conducts himself in them as he ought, is more brave than he who does so in things pertaining to confidence. Brave men, therefore, as we have before observed, are called brave, from enduring things of a painful nature. Hence also fortitude is unaccompanied with pain, and is justly praised. For it is more difficult to endure pain than to abstain from pleasure. Nevertheless the end, according to fortitude, may appear to be pleasant, but to be obscured and obliterated by surrounding circumstances, just as it happens in gymnastic contests. For to pugilists, indeed, the end for the sake of which they contend is pleasing, viz. A crown and honours, but to be beat, since this pertains to the flesh, is painful, as is likewise every labour, because however the circumstances which produce pain are many, and that for the sake of which they contend is small, it appears to possess nothing delectable. If, therefore, a thing of this kind also pertains to fortitude, death, indeed, and wounds will be painful to a brave man, and to one who is unwilling to endure them. The brave man, however, endures them because it is beautiful so to do, or because it is base not to endure them. And by how much the more he possesses every virtue, and is more happy, by so much the more will he be pained by death. For such a man most eminently deserves to live, and he is knowingly deprived by death of the greatest goods. But this is painful. He is, however, no less brave, and perhaps he is more brave, because he chooses that conduct in battle which is beautiful, in preference to these goods. To energize, therefore, delectably, does not pertain to all the virtues, except so far as they come into contact with the end. But perhaps nothing prevents not only those from being most excellent soldiers, who are most brave, but also those who are less brave, and possess no other good, for these are prepared for danger, and to lose their life for a small gain. And thus much concerning fortitude, and it is not difficult from what has been said to adumbrate what it is. CHAPTER 10. In the next place, let us speak concerning temperance. For these, i.e. fortitude and temperance, appear to be the virtues of the irrational parts. The temperance therefore is a medium, conversant with pleasures, has been already observed by us. For it is conversant in a less degree, and not similarly with pains, but about pleasures and pains intemperance also is employed. What the pleasures, therefore, are, with which temperance is conversant, we must now explain. Let pleasures, however, be divided into those pertaining to the soul, and those pertaining to the body. Thus, for instance, the pleasures pertaining to the soul are ambition and the love of learning, for each of these is delighted with that which is the object of its desire. The body not being at all affected, but rather the rational part. And those who are conversant with such like pleasures are neither denominated temperate, nor intemperate. Thus too, with respect to such other pleasures as are not corporeal. For we call those who are lovers of fables and narrations, and who consume the day in such casual circumstances as present themselves, triflers, but not intemperate. Nor do we call those intemperate who are pained by the loss of riches or friends. Temperance, however, will be conversant with corporeal pleasures, yet neither will it be conversant with all such pleasures. For those persons are not called either temperate or intemperate, who are delighted with objects of sight, such as colours and figures and pictures, though it would seem that there is also a proper manner of being delighted with these, and that it is possible to be pleased with them according to excess and defect. Thus too in things pertaining to the hearing, for no one calls those intemperate who are excessively delighted with melodies, or players, nor those temperate who are delighted with them in a proper manner, nor are those denominated temperate or intemperate who are delighted with odours, except from accident. For we do not call those persons intemperate who are delighted with the smell of apples, or roses, or odoriferous fumigations, but we rather denominate those persons so who are delighted with the smell of ointments and food. For intemperate persons are pleased with these, because through these the recollection of the objects of their desires is produced. Others also may be seen, who when they are hungry are delighted with the smell of food. But to be delighted with things of this kind is the province of an intemperate man. For to such a one these things are objects of desire. Nor do other animals receive pleasure from these senses, except by accidents. For neither are dogs delighted with the smell, but with the eating of hares. The smell producing the sense, i.e. causing them to perceive food present. Nor is the lion delighted with the voice of the ox, but with eating him. But he perceives through the voice of the ox that he is near, and is seen to be delighted with this perception. In like manner, neither is the lion delighted with seeing or finding a stag, or a wild goat, but he is pleased on seeing that from which he shall obtain food. Temperance and intemperance, therefore, are conversant with pleasures of this kind, of which also irrational animals partake. Hence, these pleasures appear to be servile and savage, and they are the pleasures pertaining to the touch and the taste. Temperance and intemperance, however, appear to use the taste, but in a small degree, or not at all. For the judgment of sapiers is the province of the taste, which those persons employ who make trial of wines and season food. The intemperate, however, are not very much delighted with these sapiers, but with the enjoyment of the food, the whole of which is effected through the touch, in meats and drinks, and in what are called venereal concerns. Hence, a certain person named Philoxenus, the son of Eryx, who was most voracious in eating, wished that he had a neck longer than that of a crane, as being one who was delighted with the touch. The touch, therefore, with which intemperance is conversant is the most common of all the senses, and will appear to be justly disgraceful, because it exists in us not so far as we are men, but so far as we are animals. To be delighted, therefore, with, and especially enamoured of such pleasures is beastly. For the most liberal of the pleasures which are perceived through the touch are not to be numerated with these. Such, for instance, as the pleasures in gymnastic exercises, produced through friction and heat, since the touch of the intemperate man does not pertain to the whole body, but to certain parts of it. Chapter 11. Of desires, however, some appear to be common, but others peculiar and advantageous. Thus, for instance, the desire of food is indeed natural, for every one, when in want, desires either dry or moist nutriment, and sometimes both. And, as Homer says, both the young man, and he who is in the vigour of his age, desire the joys of love. But every one does not desire this or that food, nor the same food. Hence, this desire appears to be properly ours, and it possesses also something natural, for different things are pleasing to different persons, and the same thing is more agreeable to some persons than to others. Few, therefore, err in natural desires, and they err in these in one way, viz. In excess. For to eat or drink, what casually presents itself, till an excessive fullness is produced, is to surpass, in multitude, what is conformable to nature, since natural desire is the replenishing of indigence. Hence, such persons are called gluttons, as replenishing the indigence of nature beyond what is becoming, and those who are very servile become men of this description. But in those pleasures which are peculiar or proper, many persons err, and in many ways, for they are denominated lovers of things of this kind, either from being delighted with things which are not proper, or being pleased with them more than is proper, as is the case with the multitude, or not in such a way as is proper, or not in that respect in which it is proper. The intemperate, however, exceed in all things, for they are delighted with some things with which it is not proper to be delighted, since they are odious; and if it is requisite to be delighted with some of such things, they are delighted with them more than is proper, and after the manner of the multitude. That excess, therefore, in pleasures is intemperance, and that it is blameable is evident. In pains, however, a man is not said to be temperate by enduring them, as in fortitude, nor intemperate by not enduring them; but he indeed is intemperate who is pained more than is requisite, because he does not partake of pleasures, so that the pleasure gives him pain, in consequence of being desired by him above measure. And he is said to be a temperate man who is not pained by the absence of pleasure, and by abstaining from it. The intemperate man, therefore, desires all pleasant things, or those which are most eminently pleasant, and is led by desire, so as to choose what is most pleasant in preference to other things. Hence also he is pained, both when he is frustrated of pleasure, and when he desires it. For desire is accompanied with pain, though it seems to be absurd that a man should be pained on account of pleasure. Those, however, who are deficient in pleasures, and are delighted with them less than is proper, are not very frequent. For an insensibility of this kind is not human, since other animals also distinguish food, and are delighted with some kinds of it, and not with others. But he to whom nothing is delectable, and with whom one thing does not differ from another, is very remote from human nature. Such a one also is without a name, because he does not very frequently exist. The temperate man, however, with respect to these things, subsists in a middle condition. For neither is he delighted with those things with which the intemperate man is especially delighted, but he is rather indignant with them. Nor, in short, does he rejoice in things in which he ought not, nor is he very much delighted with any thing of this kind, nor is he pained if it is absent, nor does he desire it, except moderately, nor more than is proper, nor at a time when he ought not, nor, in short, any thing of this kind. But such things as, being delectable, contribute to health, or to a good habit of body, these he desires moderately, and in such a way as is proper. He also desires other delectable things, which are not an impediment to these, or which are not adverse to the beautiful in conduct, or above his income, for he who is thus affected loves such pleasures beyond their desert. The temperate man, however, is not a person of this description, but is one who acts conformably to right reason. Chapter 12. Intemperance, however, appears to be more similar to the voluntary than timidity, for the former subsists on account of pleasure, but the latter on account of pain, of which the one indeed is eligible, but the other is to be avoided. And pain indeed astounds and disturbs the nature of its possessor, but pleasure produces nothing of this kind. It is, therefore, more voluntary, and on this account also it is more disgraceful. For it is more easy to be accustomed to these things, since there are many such in life, and the being accustomed to them is unattended with danger. But the contrary takes place in things of a dreadful nature. Timidity, likewise, may appear not to be similarly voluntary with particulars. For timidity, indeed, is without pain, but particulars so astound men through pain, that they throw away their arms, and act in other things indecorously. And on this account they appear to be violent. The contrary, however, takes place with the intemperate man. For particulars with him are voluntary, since he desires them, and his appetite is directed to them. But the whole of an intemperate life is less voluntary, for no one desires to be intemperate. We transfer also the name of intemperance to puerile errors, for they possess a certain similitude, but which of these is denominated from the other is of no consequence to the present discussion. It is, however, evident that the latter is denominated from the former, nor does the transition appear to be badly made. For that which desires what is base is to be punished, and which has an abundant increase. But desires in a child are especially a thing of this kind, for children live according to desire, and in these the appetite of the delectable especially flourishes. If, therefore, this appetite is not obedient, and subject to the governor reason, it increases abundantly. For the appetite of the delectable is insatiable, and in the stupid man is every way diffused. And the energy of desire increases that which is allied to it, so that if the desires are great and vehement, they expel the reasoning power. Hence it is necessary that they should be moderate and few, and in no respect adverse to reason. But we call a thing of this kind obedient, and reformed by correction. For as it is necessary that a child should live conformably to the mandate of his preceptor, thus also it is requisite that the part of the soul which energizes according to desire should live conformably to reason. Hence it is necessary that this part of the soul in the temperate man should accord with reason. For the end proposed by both, i.e. by a reason and desire in the temperate man, is the beautiful in conduct. And the temperate man desires those things which it is proper to desire, and when it is proper. But reason likewise thus ordains. And thus much concerning temperance. End of Book 3. Book 4. Chapter 1. In the next place, let us speak concerning liberality. But it appears to be a medium about riches. For the liberal man is praised, not in warlike concerns, nor in those things in which the temperate man is praised, nor again in judicial affairs, but in the giving and receiving of riches, and more in the giving than in the receiving. We call, however, riches everything, the worth of which is measured by money. But prodigality and illiberality are excesses and defects about riches. And we always, indeed, ascribe illiberality to those who pay more attention to riches than is proper. But combining, we sometimes attribute prodigality to the intemperate. For we call both the incontinent and those who consume their property in intemperance prodigals. Hence, men of this description appear to be most depraved, for at one and the same time they have many vices. They are not, however, appropriately denominated. For he is a prodigal who has one certain vice, viz. The consumption of his property. For he is a prodigal who is destroyed through himself, since the consumption of his property appears to be a certain destruction of himself, as through this the means of living are obtained. In this way, therefore, we consider prodigality. With respect to those things, however, of which there is a certain use, it is possible to use them well or ill. But wealth is among the number of things useful, and he uses everything in the best manner who possesses the virtue pertaining to each thing. He, therefore, will use wealth in the best manner who has the virtue pertaining to riches, and he is the liberal man. The use, however, of riches appears to be expense and donation, but the accepting and preservation of riches is rather possession. Hence, it is more the province of a liberal man to give to those to whom it is proper, than to receive whence it is proper, and not to receive whence it is not proper. For it is more the province of virtue to benefit than to be benefited, and to perform things which are beautiful, than not to perform things which are base. It is not, however, immanifest, that to giving, to benefit, and to act beautifully are consequent, but to receiving, to be benefited, or not to act basely. Thanks also are presented to the giver, but not to the receiver, and praise is rather bestowed on the former than the latter. It is, likewise, more easy not to receive than to give, for men are less willing to bestow what is their own, than not to receive what belongs to another. Those also who bestow are called liberal, but those who do not receive are not praised for liberality, but are no less praised for justice. Those, however, who receive are not very much praised. But of all those who are loved on account of virtue, the liberal are nearly beloved the most, for they benefit others, and this consists in giving. The actions, however, according to virtue are beautiful, and are for the sake of the beautiful. The liberal man, therefore, gives for the sake of the beautiful, and gives rightly, for he gives to those to whom it is proper, and such things as are proper, and when it is proper. and whatever other particulars are consequent to giving rightly, and this he does either delectably or without pain. For that which is conformable to virtue is delectable, or without pain, but is in the smallest degree painful. But he who gives to those to whom it is not proper, or not for the sake of the beautiful, but from some other cause, is not liberal, but must be called by some other name. Nor is he liberal who gives with pain, for such a one would prefer riches to a beautiful action. But this is not the province of a liberal man. Nor does the liberal man receive from whence it is not proper to receive, for neither is such a kind of receiving the province of one who does not honour riches. Neither will the liberal man be readily disposed to ask a favour, for it is not the province of him who benefits to be benefited easily. But he will take whence it is proper, as, for instance, from his own possessions, not as a thing beautiful, but as necessary, in order that he may have the means of giving. Nor will he neglect his own affairs, because he wishes, through these, to supply the wants of certain persons. Nor will he give to any casual persons, in order that he may have to give to those to whom it is proper, and when it is proper, and where it is beautiful to give. It is, likewise, very much the province of a liberal man, so to exceed in giving, as to leave but little for himself. For it is the property of a liberal man not to consider himself. But liberality is denominated according to the property which is possessed. For the liberal does not consist in the multitude of gifts, but in the habit of the giver, and this habit gives according to the means of giving. Nothing, however, hinders but that he may be a more liberal man who gives fewer things, if he gives them from less means. But those persons appear to be more liberal, who have not acquired property themselves, but have received it from others, for they have had no experience of want, and all men are more attached to their own works, as is evident in parents and poets. It is not, however, easy for the liberal man to be rich, since he is neither anxious to receive nor preserve wealth, but is more disposed to give, and does not honour riches on their own account, but for the sake of giving. Hence also fortune is accused, because those who most deserve to be, are in the smallest degree wealthy. This, however, does not happen unreasonably, for it is not possible that he should be rich who pays no attention to the means of obtaining wealth, as is also the case in other things. Nevertheless, the liberal man will not give to those to whom he ought not, nor when he ought not, and other things of the like kind. For if he did, he would no longer act conformably to liberality, and by thus consuming his wealth improperly, he would not have the means of giving to those to whom he ought to give. For, as we have said, he is a liberal man who spends according to his property, and on things on which he ought to spend. But he who exceeds his means in spending is a prodigal. Hence we do not call tyrants prodigals, for it does not seem to be easy by gifts and expenses to exceed the abundance of their possessions. Since, therefore, liberality is a medium which is conversant about giving and receiving riches, the liberal man will give and spend on things on which he ought, and as much as he ought, as well in small things as in great, and he will thus act willingly, and with pleasure. He will likewise receive whence it is proper, and such things as he ought to receive. For, since this virtue is a medium about giving and receiving, he will do both these in such a way as is proper, since a receiving of this kind is consequent to giving equitably, but a receiving which is not of this kind is the contrary. Things, therefore, which are consequent may subsist together in the same thing, but it is evident that contraries cannot. But if it should happen to the liberal man that he should spend beyond what he ought, and beyond what is becoming, he will be pained, yet moderately, and in such a manner as is proper. For it is the province of virtue to be pleased and pained with those things with which it is proper to be so, and in such a way as is proper. The liberal man, also, is very pliable in pecuniary contracts, for he may be injured, since he does not honour riches, and he is more indignant if he has not spent what he ought, than pained if he has spent what he ought not. For he does not assent to Simonides. But the prodigal errs also in these things. For he is neither pleased nor pained with things with which he ought, nor as he ought. But this will be more evident as we proceed. It has, however, been observed by us, that prodigality and illiberality are excesses and defects, and in two things, viz. In giving and receiving. For we place expense in the same class with giving. Prodigality, therefore, exceeds in giving and not receiving, but it fails in receiving. And illiberality fails, indeed, in giving, but exceeds in receiving, except in small things. The peculiarities, therefore, of prodigality cannot be very much conjoined. For it is not easy for him who receives nothing to give to every one, since the property of those private individuals rapidly fails, who also appear to be prodigals. For a man of this description does seem to be better, though not much, than the illiberal man. For he is easily cured by age, and by want, and may arrive at the medium. For he has the properties of the liberal man, since he gives and does not receive, yet neither as he ought nor in a becoming manner. If, therefore, he should happen to be accustomed to this, or in some other way should be changed, he would become liberal, for he would give to those to whom it is proper, and would not receive whence it is not proper. Hence the prodigal does not appear to be depraved in his manners, for it is not the property of a bad or ignoble, but of a stupid man, to exceed in giving and not receiving. But he who is prodigal after this manner appears to be much better than the illiberal man, for the above mentioned reasons, and also because the one benefits many, but the other no one, and not even himself. The multitude of prodigals, however, as we have said, receive whence they ought not, and according to this are illiberal, but they become prompt to receive, because, through being willing to spend, they are unable to do this with facility, for the means of spending rapidly fail them. Hence they are compelled to procure money elsewhere. But at the same time, because they pay no attention to the beautiful in conduct, they receive negligently, and from every one indiscriminately. For they desire to give, but it is of no consequence to them how, or whence they give. On this account, neither are their gifts liberal, for they are not beautiful, nor for the sake of this very thing the beautiful in conduct, nor are they bestowed as they ought to be, but sometimes they cause those to be rich who ought to be poor, and give nothing to men whose manners are moderate, but bestow much on flatterers, or those who are the means of procuring them any other pleasures. Hence, also, most of them are intemperate, for they spend their money easily, and likewise spend profusely, on things of an intemperate nature, and because they do not live with a view to the beautiful in conduct, they incline to pleasures. The prodigal, therefore, unless he is corrected, falls into these vices. But by care and diligence he may arrive at the medium, and to what is becoming in conduct. Illiberality, however, is incurable. For old age and every infirmity appear to render men illiberal, and it is more congenial to them than prodigality. For the multitude are more desirous of gain, than disposed to give. Illiberality, likewise, extends widely and is multiform, since there appears to be many modes of it. For, consisting in two things, a deficiency in giving, and excess in receiving, it is not wholly and entirely present with all illiberal men, but sometimes it is divided, and some indeed exceed in receiving, but others are deficient in giving. For all those to whom such appellations apply, as niggardly, tenacious, and sordid, are deficient in giving, but they do not desire the property of others, nor do they wish to receive, some, indeed, through a certain probity, and an avoidance of base conduct. For some of them seem to take care of their own property, or at least say that they do so, in order that they may not at any time be compelled to do anything base. Of these characters, however, the skinflint, and every one of the like kind, is so denominated, from giving to no one in excess. But others of these abstain from property which is not their own, through fear, because it is not easy for him who takes what belongs to others to preserve his own property unviolated. Hence, they are disposed neither to receive nor give. Others, again, exceed in receiving, in consequence of receiving on all sides and everything, such as those who perform illiberal works, together with panders, usurers, gamesters, sharpers, and other depredators, and those who for the sake of a little subject themselves to great infamy. For all these receive whence they ought not, and what they ought not. The acquisition, however, of base gain appears to be common to these. For all of them endure disgrace for the sake of gain, and this small. For we do not call those illiberal, who receive great things whence they ought not, and such as they ought not, as for instance tyrants, the subverters of cities, and the plunderers of temples, but we rather call them depraved, and impious, and unjust. The gamester, indeed, the highwayman, and the sharper, are among the number of illiberal characters, for they are addicted to base gain, since for the sake of gain they devote themselves to these employments, and endure disgraces, and some indeed expose themselves to the greatest dangers for the sake of what they may get, but others gain something from their friends to whom they ought to give. Both these, therefore, since they wish to enrich themselves, whence they ought not, are addicted to base gain, and all such receivings are illiberal. Reasonably, also, is illiberality said to be contrary to liberality, for it is a greater evil than prodigality, and men err more in this than in prodigality, of which we have spoken above. And thus much concerning liberality and the opposite vices. CHAPTER 2. It would seem to follow that we should in the next place discuss magnificence, for it also appears to be a certain virtue which is conversant with riches. It does not, however, in the same manner as liberality, extend to all pecuniary actions, but only to those that are sumptuous. For in these it surpasses liberality in magnitude, for, as its name signifies, it is a becoming costliness in great things. Magnitude, however, is a relative, for the same expense does not become the commander of a three-ranked galley, and the president of a public spectacle. The becoming, therefore, subsists with reference to him who spends, and to the things on which he spends his money, and the money which is spent. He, however, who spends with decorum in small or in moderate things, is not called magnificent, such as, "To vagrant mendicants I oft have given." But he who spends appropriately in great things, for the magnificent is a liberal man. But the liberal man is not, because liberal, magnificent. Of a habit, however, of this kind, the deficiency indeed is called parsimony, but the excess, vulgar ostentation, and ignorance of what is elegant, and such other appellations as belong to habits which do not exceed in magnitude about things in which great expense is becoming, but exhibit a splendid profusion in things in which such profusion is not proper. Concerning these, however, we shall speak hereafter. But the magnificent resembles the scientific man, for he is able to survey what is decorous and can spend largely with elegance. For, as we said in the beginning, habit is defined by energies, and by those things of which it is the habit. But the expenses of the magnificent man are great and becoming, and such also are his deeds. For thus the expenses will be great, and adapted to the deed. Hence it is necessary that the deed should be worthy the expense, and the expense worthy the deed, or even surpassing it. The magnificent man, therefore, spends after this manner for the sake of the beautiful in conduct. For this is common to the virtues. And he also spends with pleasure, and largely, because an accurate attention to expense is the province of a parsimonious man. The magnificent man, likewise, will rather consider how he may accomplish the most beautiful and becoming work, than the money it will cost, and how it may be accomplished with the least expense. It is necessary, therefore, that the magnificent should also be a liberal man. For the liberal man spends what he ought, and as he ought. But in these things, whatever is great pertains to the magnificent man. Magnificence being, as it were, a certain magnitude of liberality. Since, however, liberality is conversant with the same things as magnificence, the magnificent man will produce a more magnificent work from an equal expense. For there is not the same virtue of possession and a work, since the virtue of a possession is, to be of great worth, and most precious, as gold, but the virtue of a work is to be great and beautiful. For the survey of a thing of this kind is admirable, but the magnificent is admirable, and the virtue of a work is magnificence in magnitude. Among expenses, however, which we call honourable, are such as pertain to the worship of the gods, gifts dedicated to divinity, the building of temples and sacrifices, and in a similar manner such things as pertain to every demoniacal nature, and such as are bestowed on the community at large from a laudable ambition. Thus the expenses of the magnificent man will be of this kind, if he should think it requisite to furnish public spectacles splendidly, or three-rank galleys, or to feast the city. But in all things, as we have said, it must be considered who the agent is, and what the means are which he possesses. For the expense ought to be such as is worthy of the means, and not only adapted to the work, but also to him by whom it is effected. Hence, a poor cannot be a magnificent man, for he has not the means of spending much in a becoming manner. The poor man, therefore, who endeavours to do so is stupid, for such an endeavour is repugnant to his means and to the becoming. But that which is done rightly is done according to virtue. Such expense, however, becomes those who possess hereditary wealth, or have procured it themselves, or have derived it from their ancestors, or by legacy. And it likewise becomes those who are noble, and renowned, and other persons of the like kind, for all these have magnitude and dignity. The magnificent man, therefore, is especially a person of this description, and magnificence, as we have said, consists in such like expenses, for they are the greatest and the most honourable. With respect to private expenses, however, those pertain to the magnificent man, which are incurred but once, such as marriage, and whatever also there may be of the like kind, and that about which the whole city is earnestly occupied, or those who are in the dignified situation. Also, such expenses as pertain to the receiving and dismissing of strangers, together with gifts and remunerations. For the magnificent man does not spend sumptuously on himself, but on the public. But gifts have something similar to things consecrated to the gods. It is also the province of a magnificent man to build a house in a manner adapted to wealth, for this also is a certain ornament, and to bestow more upon those works which are more lasting, for these are most beautiful. It is likewise his province in each of these to observe the becoming, for the same things are not adapted to gods and men, either in building a temple or a sepulchre, and every essence, indeed, is great in its own kind, and that is most magnificent which is great in a great thing. But that is so in the second place which is great in these things. For there is a difference between magnitude in a work and magnitude in expense. Since a ball, indeed, or a most beautiful jug, possesses the magnificence of a childish gift, but the price of these is small and illiberal. On this account it is the province of a magnificent man to do magnificently whatever he may do, in every genus of things. For a thing of this kind cannot easily be transcended, and the magnitude of the expense is appropriate. Such, therefore, is the magnificent man. But he who exceeds and is vulgarly ostentatious, exceeds by spending, as we have before observed, beyond what is becoming. For in small things, and which require but small expense, he consumes much money, and is discordantly splendid. Thus, for instance, he will prepare a wedding dinner through ostentation, and give money to players who are present at the entertainment, as if it were for the public advantage. And in plays he will introduce a purple curtain before the scenes, as is done by the Megarensians. He will likewise do everything of this kind, not for the sake of the beautiful in conduct, but that he may display his wealth, and fancies that on account of these things he shall be admired. In things likewise where much expense is required, he spends but little, but where little expense is required, he spends largely. The parsimonious man, however, is deficient in everything, and when he has incurred a great expense, then looking to the completion of the work, by a too accurate investigation, he leaves it imperfect through too little expense. everything also which he does is accompanied with delay and consideration, and on this account he laments, and fancies that he does every thing on a larger scale than he ought. These habits, therefore, are vices, yet they do not bring with them disgrace, because they are neither injurious to others, nor base in the extreme. CHAPTER 3. But magnanimity is conversant with great things, as is evident from the very name. What the quality of the things is, however, with which it is conversant, we must, in the first place, consider. But it makes no difference whether we survey the habit, or him who subsists according to the habit. He, however, appears to be magnanimous, who deserving great things, thinks that he deserves them. For he who thinks thus of himself undeservedly, is stupid. But no one who is endued with virtue is either stupid or a fool. The above mentioned character, therefore, is magnanimous. For he who deserves small things, and thinks that he deserves them, is a modest but not a magnanimous man, since magnanimity consists in magnitude, just as beauty consists in a large body. For small men are elegant, and have symmetry of form, but are not beautiful. He, however, who thinks that he deserves great things, but thus thinks undeservedly, is proud. Though not every one is proud, who deserving many things, thinks he deserves more. But he who estimates himself less than he deserves, is pusillanimous. If, deserving things of a moderate or small nature, he thinks himself to deserve still less than these. And he will especially appear to be a character of this kind, who, deserving great things, has this humiliating opinion of himself. For what would he do if he were not deserving of such things? The magnanimous man, therefore, is in magnitude the summit, but in that which is requisite, the middle. For he thinks himself deserving of that which he does deserve. But the other characters exceed and are deficient. Hence, if deserving great things, he thinks that he deserves them, and especially if he deserves the greatest things, he will principally be conversant with one thing. What this is, therefore, must be assumed from desert, and desert is denominated with reference to external goods. We must, however, consider that as the greatest of external goods, which we attribute to the gods, after which those who are in a dignified situation especially aspire, and which is the reward of the most beautiful deeds. But honour is a thing of this kind, for this is the greatest of external goods. The magnanimous man, therefore, is conversant with honour and dishonour in such a manner as is proper. And indeed, without any reasoning process, the magnanimous appears to be conversant with honour. For great men especially think themselves deserving of honour, but they think so deservedly. The pusillanimous man, however, is deficient both with respect to himself and the desert of the magnanimous man. But the proud man exceeds, indeed, with respect to himself, yet not with respect to the magnanimous man. The magnanimous man, however, if he is deserving of the greatest things, will be the best of men. For a better character always deserves something greater, and the best of characters deserves the greatest of things. Hence it is necessary that the truly magnanimous man should be a good man, and that which is great in every virtue will appear to belong to the magnanimous man. Nor does it by any means accord with the character of the magnanimous man to fly agitated with fear, or to injure any one. For on what account will he act basely, to whom nothing is great? But from a survey of particulars, the magnanimous man will appear to be ridiculous, if he is not a good man. Nor indeed will he be worthy of honour, if he is a bad man. For honour is the reward of virtue, and is conferred on good men. Magnanimity, therefore, appears to be, as it were, a certain ornament of the virtues, for it causes them to be greater, and does not exist without them. On this account it is truly difficult to be magnanimous, for it is not possible to be so without integrity and worth. The magnanimous man, therefore, is especially conversant with honour and dishonour, and with great honours indeed, and those which are conferred by worthy men, he is moderately pleased, as being things familiar and adapted to him, or rather less than he deserves. For there can be no honour equal to the desert of all perfect virtue. Nevertheless, he will admit these honours, because they have not any thing greater to confer upon him. But he will entirely despise the honour which is paid him by casual persons, and for things of a trifling nature, for these do not accord with his desert. And in a similar manner he will despise dishonour, for it will not justly befall him. The magnanimous man, therefore, as we have said, is especially conversant with honour. Nevertheless, with respect to wealth also, and power, and all prosperous and adverse fortune, he will conduct himself in these moderately, in whatever manner they may take place, and neither in prosperity will he be very much elated, nor in adversity very much dejected. For neither is he affected with respect to honour, as if it were the greatest of things, since dominion and wealth are eligible on account of honour. Those therefore who possess these, wish through them to be honoured. To him, however, to whom honour is a small thing, other things also will be small. Hence, likewise, magnanimous men appear to be supercilious. Prosperity, however, seems to contribute to magnanimity. For those that are nobly born are thought worthy of honour, and also men in authority, and those that are rich, for they surpass others, but every thing which excels in good is more honourable. Hence also things of this kind cause men to be more magnanimous, for they are honoured by certain persons on account of them. In reality, however, the good man alone is to be honoured, but he who possesses both these, i.e. good fortune and virtue, is reckoned more deserving of honour. Those, however, who possess such like goods without virtue, neither justly think themselves worthy of great things, nor are rightly called magnanimous men. For magnanimity cannot exist without all perfect virtue. But those who possess things of this kind become supercilious and insolent, and bad men, for without virtue it is not easy to bear prosperity elegantly. But not being able to bear prosperity, and fancying that they surpass other men, they despise them, and act in a casual manner, for they imitate the magnanimous man without resembling him, and they do this in those things in which they are able. They do not therefore act conformably to virtue, but they despise other men. The magnanimous man, however, justly despises others, for he forms a true opinion of men and things, but the opinion of the multitude is casually formed. The magnanimous man also neither exposes himself to small dangers, nor is a lover of danger, because there are but few things which he considers to be of great importance. But he exposes himself to great dangers, and when he is in danger is not sparing of his life, because he does not consider life as a thing of great importance. He is, likewise, disposed to benefit others, but is ashamed to be benefited. For the former is the province of one who surpasses, but the latter of one who is surpassed. And the benefit which he returns exceeds what he received. For thus it will come to pass that he who first bestowed the benefit will be his debtor, and will be benefited by him. Magnanimous men also appear to remember those whom they have benefited, but not those from whom they have derived any advantage. For he who receives is inferior to him who confers the benefit. But the magnanimous man wishes to excel. Hence, neither does Thetis mention the benefits she had conferred on Jupiter, nor the Lacedaemonians those which they had conferred on the Athenians, but those which they had received from them. It is likewise the property of a magnanimous man to ask nothing of any one, or scarcely to do so, but to administer readily to the wants of others, and towards those indeed who are in a dignified situation, and in prosperous circumstances, to be great in his behaviour, but moderate towards those who are in a middle condition. For to surpass the former is difficult and venerable, but it is easy to excel the latter. And to conduct himself with dignity among the former is not ignoble, but among the lower class of men it is arrogant, in the same manner as it would be for a man to display his strength among the infirm. It is also the property of the magnanimous man not to betake himself to things which are held in honourable estimation, or where others possess the principal place. Likewise to be at leisure and given to delay, except where great honour is to be obtained, or some great work is to be accomplished, and to perform a few things, indeed, but these great and celebrated. It is also necessary that he should openly hate and openly love, for to conceal love or hatred is the province of one who is afraid. It is likewise the property of the magnanimous man to regard truth more than opinion, and also to speak and act openly, for this is the province of the man who despises others. Hence, he uses the greatest freedom of speech, for this pertains to him who speaks freely. Hence, too, he is a despiser of others, and a lover of truth, unless when he speaks ironically. But his language is ironical to the vulgar. The magnanimous man, likewise, is unable to live with any other person than a friend, for it is servile. Hence, all flatterers are mercenary, and all humble men are flatterers. Nor is he given to admiration, for to him nothing is great in human affairs. Nor is he mindful of injuries, for it is not the province of a magnanimous man to be mindful, and especially of evils, but rather to overlook them. Nor does he speak about men, for neither does he speak about himself, nor about another person. For he is not concerned either that he himself may be praised, or that others may be blamed. Nor again is he addicted to praise. Hence, neither does he defame any one, not even his enemies, unless in order to remove contumely from himself. And in necessary or small affairs he is by no means querulous and suppliant. For to be so is the province of a man who considers such affairs as of great consequence. He is likewise so disposed as to prefer the possession of things beautiful and unattended with advantage, to such as are advantageous and useful. For this is more the province of one who is sufficient to himself. The motion, also, of the magnanimous man is slow, his voice is grave, and his diction stable. For he who is earnestly attentive to but few things is not prone to be hasty, nor is he vehemently strenuous, who considers nothing in human affairs as great, but acuteness of voice and rapidity of motion are produced from vehemence, and considering human affairs as important. Such, therefore, is the magnanimous man. He, however, who is deficient in magnanimity is pusillanimous, but he who exceeds is proud and arrogant. Neither, however, do these characters appear to be bad, for they are not malevolent, but wander from the medium. For the pusillanimous man, indeed, deserving good things, deprives himself of what he deserves, and appears to have something depraved, in consequence of not thinking himself to deserve what is good. He also is ignorant of himself, for if he were not, he would aspire after things of which he is worthy, such things being good. Such men, however, do not appear to be stupid, but rather to be sluggish. But an opinion of this kind seems to render them worse, for every one desires what is adapted to his desert. They, likewise, withdraw themselves from beautiful actions and pursuits, as if they were unworthy of them, and in a similar manner from external goods. But the proud and arrogant are stupid and ignorant of themselves, and this obviously, for they endeavour to obtain honourable things, as if they deserved them, and afterwards are reprobated by others for doing so. They also study the ornaments of dress and graceful deportment, and the like, and they wish that their prosperity may be apparent, and they speak of themselves as if they were to be honoured on account of these things. Pusillanimity, however, is more opposed to magnanimity than pride and arrogance, for it more frequently occurs and is a worse evil. Magnanimity, therefore, is, as we have said, conversant with great honour. Chapter 4. It seems, however, that a certain virtue is conversant with honour, as we have before observed, which would appear to have a similar relation to magnanimity, that liberality has to magnificence. For both these virtues are remote from magnitude, but dispose us in such a way as is proper with respect to things moderate and small. But as in the receiving and giving of money, there are a medium, excess, and defect, thus also in the appetition of honour there are the more and the less than is proper, and whence it is proper, and as it is proper. For we blame the ambitious man as aspiring after honour more than is proper, and whence it is not proper to obtain it. And we blame the unambitious man as not deliberately choosing to be honoured, even for actions that are beautiful. Sometimes, however, we praise the ambitious man as virile, and a lover of beautiful conduct, but the unambitious man as modest and temperate, as we have before observed. But it is evident, that since the lover of a certain thing is said to be so multifariously, we do not always refer the lover of honour to the same thing. But when we praise him, it is because he desires honour more than the vulgar desire it, and when we blame him, it is because he desires it more than is proper. Since, however, the medium is anonymous, the extremes appear to contend for it as for a solitary place. But in those things in which there are excess and defect, there is also a medium. Men also aspire after honour more or less than is proper, and, therefore, they also aspire after it in such a way as is proper. Hence, this habit is praised, which is an anonymous medium about honour. It appears, however, with reference to ambition, to be a privation of ambition, and to be ambition with reference to a privation of ambition, and to be in a certain respect both with reference to both. This also appears to be the case in the other virtues. Here, however, the extremes are seen to be opposed to each other, because the middle is without a name. CHAPTER 5. But mildness is, indeed, a medium conversant with anger. Since, however, the virtue which conducts itself moderately with respect to anger is anonymous, and this is also, nearly, the case with the extremes, we refer mildness to the medium, though it appears to incline rather to the deficiency in anger, which deficiency is anonymous. But the excess may be called a certain angriness, for the passion is anger, but the causes of it are many and various. He therefore who is angry from causes, and with persons with which it is proper to be angry, and farther still, in such a manner as is proper, and when, and as long as it is proper, is praised. Hence, he will be a mild man, since mildness is praised. For the mild man wishes to be without perturbation, and not to be led by passions, but to be angry as reason may ordain in these things, and for as long a time as it prescribes. He appears, however, rather to err in the deficiency with respect to anger. For the mild man is not given to revenge, but is rather inclined to pardon. But the deficiency, whether it be a certain lenity, or whatever it may be, is blamed. For those who are not angry from causes for which it is proper to be angry, appear to be stupid. And this is also the case with those who are not angry as it is proper, nor when it is proper, nor with those persons with whom it is proper, since they appear to be without sensation, and to be void of pain. And also, since they are not angry, they are not inclined to revenge, for it is servile for a man to endure the insolent behaviour of others towards himself, and his own relations. Excess, however, in anger has a manifold subsistence, for it is possible to be angry with persons, and from causes, with which it is not proper, and also more and less, and for a longer time than is proper. All these excesses, however, are not inherent in the same person, for it is not possible that they should be. For evil destroys itself, and if it is perfect and entire, is intolerable. Those, therefore, who are irascible rapidly become angry, and with things and from causes with which they ought not to be angry, and also more than is proper. But they quickly cease to be angry, which is a most excellent thing. But this happens to them because they do not restrain their anger, but return an injury as soon as they have received it. Hence, their anger on account of its celerity is manifest, but afterwards they cease to be angry. The extremely irascible, however, are excessively rapid in their anger, and are angry with every thing, and on every occasion, whence also they derive their appellation. But the bitterly angry are with difficulty liberated from anger, and are angry for a long time, for they detain their anger from bursting forth. They cease, however, to be angry when they have taken vengeance on those that angered them, for vengeance appeases anger, producing pleasure instead of pain. But if vengeance does not take place, they are oppressed with a heavy burden, for because the manner in which they are affected is not apparent, neither does any one persuade them to be appeased. Time, however, is requisite for them to concoct their anger. But men of this description are most troublesome to themselves, and to those who are especially their friends. We likewise call those men severe in their anger, who are angry from causes for which they ought not, and in a greater degree, and for a longer time than is proper, and who cannot be appeased without revenge or punishment. To mildness, however, we rather oppose the excess than the defect, for it is more frequent, since it is more human to revenge an injury. Severe men, also, are worse for the purpose of association. But that which we before observed is also manifest from what we now say. For it is not easy to define how, and with what persons, and from what causes, and for how long a time a man should be angry, and also to what extent he may be so rightly, or erroneously. For he who transgresses in a small degree is not blamed, whether he inclines to the more or to the less, since we sometimes praise those that are deficient, and call them mild, and sometimes we call those who are severely angry virile, as being men who are able to govern others. It is not, therefore, easy to explain in words the quantity and mode of transgression which is blameable, for the judgment of this is situated in particulars, and in sense. Thus much, however, is evident, that the middle habit indeed is laudable, according to which we are angry with those persons, and from those causes, that it is proper to be so, and in such a manner as is proper, and everything else of the like kind. But the excesses and defects are blameable, and these, indeed, if they deviate but a little from the medium, are blameable in a small degree, if more, in a greater degree, and if much, they are very blameable. It is evident, therefore, that the middle habit must be retained, and thus we have discussed the habits pertaining to anger. Chapter 6. In the associations, however, of men with each other, and in the communication of words and deeds, some persons appear to be placid and obsequious, who praise everything with a view to pleasure of those with whom they associate, and are not their opponents in anything, in consequence of fancying that they ought not by any means to offend them. Others, on the contrary, are adverse to their associates in everything, and are not at all concerned about whom they may offend, and these are called morose and litigious. That the above mentioned habits, therefore, are blameable, is not immanifest, and also that the medium between these is laudable, according to which a man admits what he ought, and as he ought, and is in a similar manner indignant. No name, however, is given to this medium, but it seems especially to resemble friendship. For he who subsists according to the middle habit is such a one as we wish a worthy friend to be, if he also assumes, in conjunction with it, a love resembling filial love. But it differs from friendship, because it is without passion, and a love resembling filial love towards those upon whom it is exercised. For it does not admit everything in such a manner as is fit, in consequence of loving or hating, but from a habit of approving, or reprehending properly. For he who possesses this habit, will be similarly affable to those whom he does not, and to those whom he does know, to his associates, and to those with whom he does not associate, except that to each of these his affability will be appropriate. For it is not fit similarly to pay attention, or give pain, to familiars and strangers. We have, therefore, universally shown that he will conduct himself in his associations in such a manner as is proper, but referring his actions to the beautiful in conduct, and the useful, his aim will be neither to give pain to, nor delight others, by obsequiousness. For this virtue appears to be conversant with the pains and pleasures which take place in associations. But when the possessor of this virtue cannot delight his associates worthily, or without injuring them, he is indignant, and deliberately chooses to give them pain, rather than to injure them by obsequiousness. He, also, will not permit another person to be obsequious to him in those things which are attended with no small disgrace or injury, and the contrary, to which produces but little pain, but he will rather be indignant. He will, likewise, associate differently with those who are in a dignified situation, and any casual persons, and with those who are more or less known to him. In a similar manner also in other differences he will attribute to every one what it is fit for each person to receive, and he will, indeed, choose to give delight to others, as a thing of itself eligible, but will cautiously avoid giving them pain. And with respect to events, if they are greater, he will follow them, he will follow the beautiful in conduct, and the advantageous, and for the sake of great pleasure afterwards he will give pain in a small degree. Such, therefore, is the middle character, but he is without a name. With respect, however, to those who delight others, he who aims at pleasing, and nothing else, may be called accommodating. But he who does this in order that he may derive some pecuniary advantage, or such things as are procured through money, is a flatterer. And he who is indignant with everything, we have already said is morose and litigious. The extremes, however, appear to be opposed to each other, because the medium is anonymous. Chapter 7. The medium of arrogance also is nearly conversant with the same things, but this medium, likewise, is anonymous. It will not, however, be foreign from the purpose to discuss such like habits, for by discussing each particular we shall know more of what pertains to manners, and shall be persuaded that the virtues are media, when we understand what takes place in all of them. With respect, therefore, to the associations of men with each other, we have already spoken concerning those who associate with a view to pleasure and pain. But let us now consider those who are men of veracity or falsehood, alike in words and deeds, and dissimulation. The arrogant man, therefore, appears to be one who pretends to things of a splendid nature which he does not possess, or to such as are more splendid than he possesses. The dissembler, on the contrary, denies what he possesses, or makes it to be less than it is. But the middle character, forming a just opinion of himself, is a man of veracity in his life, and in his words, acknowledging that he possesses what he does possess, and neither more nor less. Each of these, however, may be done for the sake of something, or for the sake of nothing, but such as a man is, such also will be his words and actions, and such also will be his life, unless he acts for the sake of something. Of itself, however, falsehood is bad and blamable, but truth is beautiful and laudable. Hence, the man of veracity, indeed, being a middle character, is laudable. But of the two characters who want veracity, both indeed are blamable, but the arrogant man more than the other. We shall, however, speak concerning each of these, and in the first place concerning the man of veracity. For we do not speak of the man who has veracity in compacts, and in things which pertain to injustice or justice, for this will belong to another virtue. But we speak of him who, though nothing of this kind should occur, is a man of veracity, both in words and in his life, because he is such from habit. But such a one will appear to be a worthy man, for he who is a lover of truths, and who speaks the truth in things in which it is of no consequence whether he does or not, will in a still greater degree speak the truth of things in which it is of consequence. For he will avoid what is false as base, and which also he will of itself avoid. But such a man is worthy of praise. He will, however, if it should be requisite to deviate from the medium, rather incline to what is less than the truth. For this appears to be more elegant, because excesses are troublesome and invidious. But he who pretends that he possesses things of greater consequence than he really does, and this for the sake of nothing else, resembles indeed the depraved man. For otherwise he would not be delighted with falsehood, yet he seems to be rather a vain than a bad man. If, however, he does this for the sake of something, such as glory or honour, he is not very blamable, as the arrogant man is. But if he does it for the sake of money, or for things which pertain to money, he is more base. But the arrogant man is not characterized by capacity or power, but by deliberate choice, for he is arrogant according to habit, and because he is such a character. Thus also with respect to the man who is without veracity, one delights in falsehood itself, but another delights in it in consequence of aspiring after glory or gain. Those, therefore, who are arrogant for the sake of glory, pretend the possession of those things for which men are praised, or proclaimed to be happy. But those who are arrogant for the sake of gain, pretend to be those characters with which others are delighted, and of which the non-possession may be latent, such as to be a physician, or a prophet, or a wise man. On this account most men pretend, and arrogate to themselves things of this kind, for they possess the above-mentioned qualities. Dissemblers, or the ironical, however, who speak less than the truth, appear indeed to be more elegant in their manners, for they do not seem to speak for the sake of gain, but in consequence of avoiding fastidiousness. But these persons especially deny that they possess things of an illustrious nature, as also Socrates did. Those, however, who pretend that they do not possess small things, and which are obvious, are called crafty or delicate deceivers, and are very contemptible men. Sometimes also this species of dissimulation appears to be arrogance. Such for instance as the garments of the Lacedaemonians. For excess and very great deficiency alike pertain to arrogance. But those who moderately use irony, and are ironical in things which are not very much known and obvious, appear to be elegant men. The arrogant man, however, seems to be opposed to the man of veracity, for he is a worse character. Chapter 8. Since, however, there is a certain relaxation in life, and rest from labour, and since this remission is accompanied with jesting, it appears that here also there is a certain elegant method of conversation, in which such things are said as are proper, and are delivered in a proper manner, and similarly with respect to hearing what it is proper to hear, and hearing it in such a way as is fit. But there is a difference in speaking to some persons rather than to others, and in hearing some things rather than others. It is evident, however, that in these things also there is an excess and deficiency with respect to the medium. Those therefore who exceed in the ridiculous appear to be scurrilous and troublesome, for they entirely affect the ridiculous, and aim more at exciting laughter, than at speaking in a becoming manner, and not giving pain to the object of their ridicule. But those who do not say themselves anything ridiculous, and are indignant with those who do, appear to be rustic and rigorous. Those, however, who jest elegantly are called facetious and versatile, as being of a flexible genius. For of manners there appear to be such like motions, but as a judgment is formed of bodies from motions, so likewise of manners. Since, however, there is a redundancy of the ridiculous, and most men delight in jests and cavilling more than is proper, the scurrilous also are called versatile, as being polite and pleasant. But that they differ, and in no small degree, is evident from what has been said. To the middle habit, also, dexterity is appropriate, but it is the province of a dexterous man to say and hear such things as are adapted to a worthy and liberal man. For there are certain things which it becomes such a one to say and hear in jest, and the jesting of a liberal differs from that of a servile man, and again, the jesting of an erudite differs from that of an inerudite man. But the truth of this may be seen, both from ancient and modern comedies. For in the former, the ridiculous consisted in obscenity, but in the latter, the suspicion of obscenity rather excited laughter. These things, however, differ in no small degree with respect to the decorous and elegant. Whether, therefore, is he who ridicules well to be defined by this, that he says what it becomes a liberal man to say? Or by this, that he does not pain, or that he delights the hearer? Or shall we say that a thing of this kind is indefinite? For a different thing is odious and pleasing to a different person. He will also hear things of this kind, viz. Things that are adapted to a worthy and liberal man. For such things as a man endures to hear, such also he appears to do. He will not, therefore, do or say everything, for cavilling is a certain invective. Legislators, however, forbid certain invectives, and perhaps it would be proper that they should also forbid cavilling. The elegant and liberal man, therefore, will so conduct himself, as if he were a law to himself. Hence, the middle character is a man of this description, whether he is to be denominated dexterous or versatile. But the scurrilous man is vanquished by the ridiculous, and neither spares himself nor others if he can excite laughter. He likewise says such things as the elegant man would never say, and some things that he says the elegant man would not even endure to hear. The rustic man, however, is useless with respect to such conversations, for, contributing nothing, he is indignant with all of them, but relaxation and jesting appear to be necessary to the life of man. There are, therefore, the above mentioned three media in life, but all of them are conversant with the communion of certain words and actions. They differ, however, because one of them is conversant with truth, but the others are conversant with the delectable. But of the media which pertain to pleasure, one indeed is conversant with jests, but the other with the associations which belong to the rest of life. Chapter 9. With respect to shame, it is not fit to speak of it as of a certain virtue, for it resembles passion more than habit. It is defined therefore to be a certain dread of infamy, and, similar to fear, it is exercised about dreadful things. For those who are under the influence of shame become red, or blush, but those who have the fear of death upon them are pale. Hence, both these appear to be in a certain respect corporeal, which seems rather to belong to passion than to habit. This passion, however, is not adapted to every age, but to youth. For we think it requisite that young persons should be bashful, because they commit many errors in consequence of living from passion, but are restrained from the commission of them by shame. And we praise indeed bashful young men, but no one praises a bashful old man, for we think that he ought not to do anything for which he should be ashamed. For neither does shame pertain to a worthy man, since it is produced by bad conduct. For the things which cause shame are not to be done. But it makes no difference whether some things are in reality base, but others only base according to opinion. For neither of these are to be done, so that shame is not to be admitted. The thing of this kind also, viz., to do something base, is the province of a bad man. But for a man to be so disposed as to be ashamed, if he should do anything that is base, and to fancy himself on this account to be a worthy character, is absurd. For shame pertains to voluntary actions, but a worthy man never voluntarily acts basely. Shame, however, from hypothesis, may seem to be good. For if a worthy man should act basely, he would be ashamed. But this does not pertain to the virtues. Nor, if impudence is a bad thing, and not to be ashamed when acting basely, will it be at all a more worthy thing to be ashamed when performing base deeds? Neither is continence a virtue, but a certain mixed thing. This, however, we shall discuss hereafter, but let us now speak concerning justice. End of Book 4.